Ready? Let's see. Give him a moment or two.
Wait for the easel.
Wooden stuff.
So, okay.
Evening, call order the Thursday, June 8th meeting of the Woodland Park Planning Commission. Roll call, please.
Chairman Hartsfield,
Here.
Vice Chair Brown,
Here.
Don Tazone,
Here.
George Jones,
Here.
Ken Kennedy,
Here.
Larry Larson,
Here.
and Sean Nelson.
Here.
Please join me in the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have the approval of the minutes from the April 13th meeting. Hope everyone's had the chance to review those. Any comments or clarifications?
No.
Being none, all in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No, okay. Takes us to item 4 on our agenda, public hearings. We have one item tonight. CUP SPR 2023-02 Core Electric Cooperative request to approve conditional use permit and site plan to renovate and expand the core electrical cooperative facilities in the community commercial CC zone located at 800 North Highway 67. It's known as Lot 1, Cary Subdivision number 2. CJ, this is your presentation.
Yes, sir.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, commissioners. Again, my name is CJ Gates. I'm representing the City of Woodland Park Planning Department. As stated, the application before you tonight is a request by LKA Partners and Core Electric Cooperative for approval of a conditional use permit to renovate and expand the core facility within the City of Woodland Park. The subject property on Lot 1R of the Cary Subdivision Filing 2 is located west of Highway 67 and north of Evergreen Heights Drive. The site is bordered by commercial zone property and occupied by Diamond Campground to the north here. Directly to the south is land zone public / semi-public, and that is the Teller County Fire Department. And suburban residential where the Woodland Park Church of Nazarene is. On the east side, we also have suburban residential zone land, which is a single family development. And same thing here on the east side, single family residential. Finally, the subject property is zoned community commercial as seen on the right hand side of the slide. The subject property has been incorporated into the City of Woodland Park since the 1970s. Core Electric, previously known as IREA, received their first building permit on this property in 1979 and has been operating within the city since then. Staff has researched this property and have found no records of a previous conditional use permit issued for the site and use. On the right-hand side of the slide is a site plan where the existing layout of the subject property. As you can see, there is currently an office, a warehouse, and a covered vehicle storage on the east side of the parcel. This office building is open to the public, though Core suggests that their customers pay their bill online and not in person at this facility. Also existing on the subject property is additional external storage for equipment for the Core linemen that work from this facility, as well as pole storage. Core has been operating since at the subject property since 1979, and a conditional use permit has never been issued from the city. The current proposal is for a conditional use permit to allow the existing operation and the proposed additions to the facility in order to enhance the operation at this specific location. Within the applicant's letter of intent, they identify the use of subject property as essential services and utilities. Staff has analyzed this application and Core's current operations and disagrees with the essential service and utilities designation. Staff has with the research, staff has fallen with the contractors and construction services designation, which is listed as a conditional use in the community commercial zone district. The applicant has pointed out the current proposal includes several deviations from the City of Woodland Park Municipal Code. Within subsection B of the applicant's letter of intent, they identify that section 18.21 of the city code states that within the CC zone district, the maximum number of accessory buildings on any lot for any principal building shall be 2. The applicant is requesting approval of the CUP with a total of 4 structures and has been provided information regarding why the buildings are necessary for the operation to this facility, which provides essential service to the community. Staff is viewing the property as having 2 separate principal uses, which are the administrative side catering towards the on-site operations, and then the warehouse side catering more towards the off-site operations, where Core's employees stage vehicles and materials to then go work off-site. Each principal use may have its own primary structure as well as 2 accessory structures. Subsection C of the applicant's letter of intent addresses the requirement that 25% of the site is to be landscaped. I would like to point out that the applicant is proposing over 100,000 square feet of landscaping on the site, which exceeds the minimum requirement of 74,066 square feet for this specific site. The issue is the location of the landscaping on the site. Half of the minimum required landscape must be adjacent to residentially zoned areas. The proposed landscape plan includes a total of 34,477 square feet of landscaping instead of the 37,033 square feet adjacent to the residentially zoned land to the west. This does not include the additional square footage of landscaping along the south property line adjacent to the church that is also zoned residential. The remainder of the landscaping occurs around the remainder site perimeter. As seen on the site plan later on, in order to maximize the buffering the site from the surrounding properties, the applicant is also proposing a new opaque 6-foot chain link fence and has planned a landscaping buffer around all sides of the site. Lastly, subsection E of the applicant's letter of intent addresses the architectural design guidelines in section 18.33 subsection H.3 of the city code. Per that code section, the primary use of prefabricated metal for an entire structure, panelized flat wood and highly reflective materials for facing materials is prohibited. The only proposed exterior material for the heated vehicle parking and warehouse building and the unheated parking building is metal wall panels. As the buildings are proposed, they do not comply with this specific section of city code. The proposed metal buildings are planned to be set deep into the property, thus making them difficult to see from Highway 67. The additional landscape buffer, as well as the fencing, will also shield these proposed buildings from the view of the street. As promised here, we have the proposed site plan. So just as a reference for everyone, this is a true north here. So we have north to the bottom, north to the top and south to the bottom. On the right-hand side of the screen, on the east side, you'll see Highway 67. On the left side of the screen, which is the west side, where my cursor is here, is the residentially zoned area that we called out previously. On the proposed site plan, we also have a stormwater detention pond. As you can see here, we have a landscape buffer around the whole property line, as long as thick landscaping along Highway 67, and this would be the Church of Nazarene down here to the south. Again, we have Diamond Campground to the north here. Also with the proposed site plan, they outline the existing building with additions, which is labeled as Building A. Building B is labeled as the proposed heated parking with a wash bay included. Building C is the proposed heated parking. And Building D is the proposed parking canopy. The first 2 images you see on this slide are renderings of the proposed elevations for the renovated and expanded administration building. The updated structure is proposed to have a total height of 20 feet and includes updated building materials in order to enhance the aesthetics, including stucco, concrete masonry units, and metal trim. On the next slide, you will see a more in-depth rendering of the public entrance of the administration building. The bottom rendering on this slide is the proposed elevation for the heated parking area, which will have a total height of 28 feet and 2 3/4 inches. Due to the shape of the subject parcel and the perimeter of screening, the heated parking building, along with several other improvements, will be tucked deep into the site, shielded from Highway 67. As previously stated, the bottom rendering of the heated parking building shows the building will be constructed out of all metal materials, which the city does not allow. Again, the applicant provided an additional rendering of the proposed entrance of the administration building to showcase the aesthetically pleasing proposed renovations to the public entrance that will be visible from Highway 67, as you can see here. Staff reviews chapter 18.34 in accordance with the site plan submittal. As part of the conditionally. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Staff reviews chapter 18.57 labeled conditional use permit when reviewing these types of applications, and their provisions are as follows. The application complies with the criteria listed on this slide. The final application is reviewed. All right, I apologize. I just fat fingered here, but that's all right. So the proposed development and use shall have a direct need to the location where it is located, and this does comply. The proposed development and use shall not endanger the public health. The proposed development and use shall not sustainably injure the value of vicinity properties. And the proposed development and use shall be in harmony with the area which it is located, and all of these provisions on the slide comply. The proposed development needs to conform with the provisions of the city plans and standards, requirements of all city regulations, and shall be designated to accommodate off-site traffic. The application complies with provisions 5 and 7 on the slide, while number 6 may comply. The applicant is requesting the CUP be approved with 2 principal buildings and 2 accessory buildings. They will not meet the full landscaping percentage at the rear of the property. However, they have exceeded the minimum landscaping requirements. Given the lot configuration and the essential operational needs of CORE, staff is comfortable with these deviations. Attached within the staff report is a detailed city staff redline comments of the application. City staff has called out issues with the applicant's proposed site plan, including the size of water main needed to serve the administration building, as well as design the proposed sidewalk. Comments must be addressed during the construction document phase of this application process. The proposed application needs to be designed, constructed, and maintained appropriately and be supplied with adequate water supply. And it needs to be designed to not increase public danger of fire. The application complies with items 8 through 10 on the slide. And lastly, the development is required to adhere to the Woodland Park architectural design standards. This provision may comply. As I previously mentioned, an entry feature is being added to building A and will be visible from the street. The concern is with buildings B and C as seen on the site plan, where the exterior consists of only metal wall panels. While the 2 different colors are proposed to create a Fox wainscot, this does not comply with the city architectural design standards. The application will comply if the applicant identifies a different material for the wainscot and adheres to the city's architectural design standards. Staff also reviews section 18.34 of the city code when reviewing this application. That full analysis is within your staff report and is redundant to the criteria we just reviewed. In accordance with the conditional use permit, the applicant is also required to submit preliminary site plan along with other preliminary site development plans. As far as process goes, staff makes comments on the preliminary documents during this CUP process that we're in right now. And typically they get resolved when the applicant submits for final site plan, which are essentially construction documents that are after the applicant gets their entitlements. And that process is done administratively through the planning department. The application was referred to the city and outside referral agencies on this slide. Staff also issued a red line comment packet to the applicant, which was attached within your staff report. The Northeast Teller County Fire Protection District Chief submitted a comment on April 28th, 2023, stating that the application for site plan meets fire district approval, and the district will comment on the individual zoning development permit process when they see the site plan with water plans for hydrant placement. They also noted that the Colorado Springs Fire Department will be reviewing the building plans and will conduct the inspections. No public comments have been received for this application. Staff's recommendation is that the Planning Commission recommend to City Council approval of a conditional use permit and site plan to renovate and expand the core electric cooperative facilities in the community commercial zone, subject to the following conditions. Number one, prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant shall submit for and receive approval of a final site plan for permitted use, including landscaping, drainage, architectural elevations, access, etc. Infrastructure zoning development permit. Fees in lieu shall be submitted pursuant to Municipal Code Section 18.33.170. ZDPs and building permits for all new construction, including all civil construction drawings, final drainage report, final landscape plan, final site plan, final floor plans and elevations, final grading, sediment control plan with BMPs, final utility plan, water, sewer, power, etc. Final photometric plan, and Colorado stormwater permit and stormwater management. Number two, a final updated site plan resolving all issues identified on the red-lined plans must be approved by the city before any zoning development permit will be issued. All development impact fees must be paid prior to any ZDP issuance, including but not limited to tap fees, stormwater capital improvement fees, transportation capital fees, etc. Fees shall be calculated concurrent with the ZDP review. 4, the applicant must submit documentation from the Colorado Department of Public Health demonstrating that the proper removal of the underground fuel storage tanks. And lastly, prior to the final site plan approval, the applicant must identify a different material for the wainscot on the heated vehicle parking / warehouse building, building B, and the unheated parking building, building C, as well as work with staff to ensure that all proposed structures adhere to the Woodland Park aesthetic. Thank you, commissioners. This concludes my presentation, and we also have representatives from the applicant if you guys have any questions for them as well.
Okay, any questions for staff at this point?
Maybe one area, but
Sure.
could you repeat the analysis about how many accessory buildings there are and how that applies?
Sure. So within the community commercial zone district, we have a provision in there that states that only 2 accessory buildings can be constructed per one primary structure. So the applicant reading this and staff and the applicant had talks, before the actual submittal regarding this section of code. So they're proposing a total of 4 buildings on the site with this conditional use permit. So if you were to follow that specific code section, really that would only be 3 buildings, right? A primary structure and 2 accessory. Staff's analysis of that is that they have really 2 different primary jobs on that parcel. They have the administration side where they, man an office where folks can come in and pay their bills. And they also have, the western part of the site where it's really the linemen's area where they stage vehicles and they stage materials to go, park their personal vehicles there, pick up the core vehicles, and then go out to a site and, do what linemen do.
It is one building. You're simply saying one building has 2 uses. The principal, there's a single principal building which has 2 uses.
In this specific case, it would be 2 principal buildings.
Are they separate buildings?
Yes. Yeah, I can go to,
Yeah.
yeah, the
There's
proposed
office
site
building
plan.
Plus the heated.
Yeah,
parking
so
Wash bay.
this would be a primary structure for the, on-site
Understood.
operations. And the proposed heated parking with a wash bay would be a primary structure
Okay,
for
so-
the
So that,
off-site operations.
so building B is a principal structure.
Correct. That's the way staff is looking at this.
Does their code address how many principal buildings they can have?
It does not. So, in the fact that they've functioned in this location for so long, and provide such a critical use or service to the community, that caused me to be a little creative, that you may or may not appreciate the creativity. But I also tried to think very clearly in terms of other uses or other requests, would I get to the same conclusion? So that's the additional filter when I try to look at things. So not get us too far out on a limb. In this particular situation, partly because of the site layout and what they're working with, it made sense for them to split this up in this configuration. The other piece of this is this being a conditional use permit. The planning commission certainly has some more latitude, in my opinion, to make a call to allow an additional building would be my take. So that's how we landed here. You may not be comfortable with that, and you can certainly push back, but that was.
What I was looking also too is just the definition of accessory use. Accessory use means a use or structure naturally and normally incidental to, subordinate to, and devoted exclusively to the main use of the land or buildings. So it
And
didn't
this-
seem to anticipate multiple,
Well, in this particular situation, both the administrative and the offsite functions just so happen to be located on the same property. So that was part of the rationale in terms of splitting it apart in terms of, yes, this one property has two essentially primary uses. Sometimes, that might not be the case, but for this particular property and what's going on there, that was our take on it.
and no, I did appreciate the creativity you're showing. I don't have any objection to the concept of it. It's just if it doesn't really apply, we should send it with a recommendation to the city council that included an ordinance change to create an exception for this particular situation. If we're comfortable that it applies without excessive creativity, then that's not necessary.
Yeah, and if I may, I mean, the applicant is proposing, for acceptance of the CUP, with this, it's not really condition of approval, but if you're, if you don't specifically call this issue out, then I think it's implied that you're okay with it. That makes sense.
Can I ask Lee, so they're asking for additional parking. Are you, well, I guess I should wait for them to get up here. Are they doing anything different with the buildings?
Yeah, they can talk.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
talk a little bit more, just because it's heated parking, so if they were to be apartments and they put in a garage, would that be any different than what's considered?
The question is how many garages they're adding to
Yeah,
not what the function.
Are there multiple principal buildings? There's clearly only one principal use of a land by the way the accessory use definition is done, but maybe there can be. Maybe the buildings have separate uses and that overrides the single principal use of
Yeah.
of the land,
yeah,
maybe.
because I see where you're going.
And we did also look at it through the lens of, there are some uses out there where you do have one use, but you have multiple principal buildings. An example of that would be Trail Ridge Apartments. There's multiple apartment buildings out there. So there's multiple principal buildings.
Is the zoning different between?
Yeah,
There
it
and
is.
here?
It is,
Yeah, that'd
but,
be multifamily.
but
Is there a limit on principal? Is there any limitation on principal buildings?
no.
So.
So that, like I said, it's probably not as firm as you'd like. Am I in a hurry to do a code patch for this? Not so much, because that's part of the reason our code looks the way it does right now. This is not a situation I would think you would see on a regular basis. And then through the conditional use process, that I think it's reasonable to find that both these uses can coexist, and the structures they are asking for is potentially a reasonable number for what they're wanting to do. It's not like they came in with,
Oh, yeah, I wasn't suggesting it's an
Yeah.
unreasonable arrangement. I just.
Yeah.
If we're not comfortable that it's compliant, then we need to address it.
so. I was gonna say, it's not like they came in with 14 tough sheds, which other places I've seen somebody try to do that. So,
I agree with Lee's assessment, and used very creative interpretation to get to this point. Did you at any one time think about, well, that would require a variance, you need to go to the Board of Adjustment, or do you try to work with the conditional use process and say the commission, the council has the authority to kind of bend a little bit?
I was going with the second one in terms of ability to bend a little bit through the conditional use. The other part of this is you currently have both uses operating on this site now. You both of them are already there. They're really looking at changing the buildings that support those uses. So that was the bigger shift, is the support buildings to help their operations function effectively for many years to come.
And it's not like this use kind of evolved into two uses. It was from the very beginning,
Exactly.
administrative as well as line work.
So where's the line work building? Sorry to interrupt real quick, but
Yeah, so on the east side of the site here, this is the administration building.
right?
This is the proposed heated parking bay. And then over here, it will be a lineman training facility. And there's no structures being proposed here.
So are they currently both doing both uses out of one building?
Out of this building, correct? Yeah, and currently, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, when you guys get up here, is there's storage here as well, inside storage. So,
Okay.
yep.
Another option would. CJ laughed because we met this morning. I didn't grab the mouse from him, but I'm like reaching for it at the moment. Would be that buildings B and C, that if that was reconfigured, perhaps so that those two became one longer building, that might not work so great on their site because they're really trying to make sure they've got vehicle circulation around and such. But that would, I guess, be a potential solution if you really wanted to be very strict about two accessory buildings end of story.
I wasn't trying to change the buildings, and Larry alluded to the exact, it's. The city council can approve a conditional use permit as part of the ordinance saying to approve this conditional use permit. They ought to be able to say. With such principal accessory buildings as are proposed. And then if the city council identifies that as being acceptable, then it is. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thought.
CJ, what's to the west of this?
To the west of the site.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's a single family residential community.
and they're not doing any landscaping on that side.
They are, so this is a stormwater detention
Yep,
pond.
yep.
Which will, have all of the detention pond landscaping around it.
Okay,
And then as you can see here, there's gonna be 3 trees to the southwest side.
That's the area that was minimal compared to the front being heavy.
right.
This is reflected.
So those trees indicated are new plants.
Correct. Yeah.
Along with.
Along with the 6-foot opaque fence. Correct. Yeah.
And again, you have not received any public comments to this date
Correct.
about this particular project.
Correct.
Do you know if there has been any historic concerns about the operation from the adjacent neighborhood?
Not to my knowledge, the planning department hasn't heard anything from the surrounding citizens regarding their operations.
It's a fairly quiet use.
Are there any additional driveways or anything additional that they're gonna be doing?
No, it's just-
Moving everything around, or is it all?
No, that's good, yeah.
That's okay. They can hit on that
Okay.
you know,
I
in
didn't quite see
specific
the-
detail. But in general, Highway 67 again is here on the west side. And the linemen and the employees with core access through the north side here. And that's a long driveway that accesses the back of the site. So that's gonna be their ingress egress there, so.
Oh, see, and you mentioned one of the conditions is the removal of the gas tanks. So are those being used? Or I assume
So-
not.
Yeah, so they can talk about the existing
Okay.
tanks and what they're being used for now. Our condition is specifically, so when you remove a underground gas tank, you have to get approval from CDPHE. So that's the state of Colorado Department of Health. So we want to see that, that documentation demonstrating that they properly removed that storage tank and there's not, gasoline everywhere on the site. So that was that thought there. So.
Okay. Oh, and my last, I think it's my last question. One of the buildings, the adjacent buildings is a canopy, it's a parking canopy, right? It's,
Correct,
so that's a new ad, I assume.
correct. That is that's proposed.
Yeah,
So, so this is a parking canopy here and this is on the south side of the site.
Hmm.
Yep, I believe 12 parking bays under this proposed canopy.
And all the opaque fencing is going on the front of all that, right?
On the southern portion, if you will, on this site.
In the west.
In the west, yep, correct.
Open fence.
CJ made a comment that the applicant classified this as essential services. And you reclassified it as contractor and construction services.
Sure.
What are the code differences between those designations?
Yeah, so within the code. I will say that we have essential services within our use table. And evidently, no essential services is allowed in any zone district in Woodland Park according to our use table. So that is concerning.
I guess we
So-
recommend against using that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So. Yep. So the big thing that staff looked at when we were kind of looking at what designation to put on this is. To us, the code really stated like, when they're looking at essential services, they're really thinking like that is the fiber that's going in the line. That's the electricity that's going into the.
Transformer box in the neighborhood.
Exactly.
That's.
Yep. So when we looked at contractor services, they're storing materials here, they're parking trucks here. Their folks live off-site, they come here, park their personal vehicles here, then pick up those materials they need and then drive somewhere else to do the work.
And there's a business office on site.
And there is a business office off-site. So with that contractor construction services, that is listed as a conditional use, allowable by a conditional use within the community commercial zone district. So.
Did you share that information with the applicant as soon as you made that interpretation?
Correct. Yeah, and they can speak on that as well if they'd like.
Any other questions this time? I invite the applicant to come forward and I think you might have some presentation, so the microphone, please. Name and affiliation.
Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Robert Osborne. I'm the Business Development Director for Core Electric Cooperative, located headquarters in Sedalia, Colorado, as well as here in Woodland Park. First, I wanted to thank you for your consideration of our application this evening. I also want to thank the work with the staff over the many weeks. It's been very fruitful with our team. Members of our team tonight are here. Jeff Gribbles, he's our project manager. We have our architect, Doug Hahn. We have our engineer, Tim McConnell, and our owner's representative, Kristen Willis-Matney is here as well. So we all may answer questions. I'm not the expert of everything. These folks really are. We really appreciate your consideration, as I mentioned, And I thought perhaps maybe I can just kind of give you an overview to maybe help answer some of the questions you had about the facility and our intent. As it was mentioned by staff, the facility's been here since the early 70s. Core has been the electric provider up in this service territory, I think, since the 1930s. And the purpose and need of this facility is because our service area is growing. We're seeing more businesses, more residential uses, and therefore we're having to serve more of our members up in this service area. Currently, just so you're aware, the site as it's been used is undersized for the materials and for the trucking and staffing needs that we have. Because more people, more business, more growth in some ways does require that the utility has the agility to have more equipment to serve. A great example is recently, as you know, there was a snowstorm up here. We had some outages. A lot of the equipment that we had to bring, it was from out of town. It was literally coming up from Bennett and Sedalia. So the modifications to the site and the proposed buildings allow us to store more material and have the ability to be faster acting in restoring services if there are damages or outages. This service area is probably one of the most difficult service areas we have within our territory. We have less meters per line mile, so farther out, more rugged in the sense of the mountains. And as you know, up here, the weather is vastly different than, say, on the Front Range or in the Eastern Plains that we serve. So having the ability to have more staff and more equipment up here in real time is helpful to us. In addition, as you may or may not know, when we do bring equipment to facilities, when we purchase it and it gets delivered, the sales tax associated to that equipment is then charged to the community that receives it where we store it. So this will bring a little more economic engine in that respect to you as a community. I think there were some questions about the accessory buildings and the current uses. I wanted to maybe touch a little bit about that. One of the buildings that was on the document, and I can show this one. Sorry, we're going old school. One of the buildings here on the south side is basically a carport. We recognize that with hail and things like that, it's just an accommodation to our staff who will park. So it's not a walled structure. It literally is a very open corridor of posts and a roof over it so folks can park and protect their primary vehicles. If we look at the front of the site, the primary office building, this building will host more of our engineers, our management folks. There was a question about how many folks actually visit this building. Doug did a very, I wouldn't say scientific study, but he has monthly meetings at the buildings. And from last month when he signed in to this month, there were 10 other people that signed in. So we get very little foot traffic in our administrative office. Most of the staff that comes in or folks that come in from the public are invited, talk about a project, talk about some issues they have and working with their engineers and our construction teams. Looking at the north here, if you can kind of where the access coming off of Highway 67, that'll be that driveway. That driveway will be gated. So essentially, there will be no access for the public beyond the gate, beyond that front building. So everything behind that is really I'll call the operations side related to these additional use buildings. So the two structures, which will have our trucks, cleaning bays, those are heated not only to keep the trucks warm and alive, but also allow us to clean them and clean materials, work on equipment in a heated space. And then the rear portion, again, very similar, allows us to have our equipment heated and worked on if necessary, so that we're not, limiting ourselves in cold weather. One of the things that is also important for us to share with you is that currently there's an accessory building on the site, and it's also a steel building. That building is being removed. That building sits further north towards the north property than the current proposed building. This building is actually tucked behind the administrative office. So there's very little visibility of the structure from Highway 67. And with the use of the fencing that we're proposing, and I guess you call it what's the word I'm looking for? Screening that the fencing provides, you'll see very little of these buildings because they're so far back and tucked into the site, more centered than more on the outskirts. With that, I think the question about the landscaping, we do have more than what's required. And the landscaping component is something that we feel does mimic in the needs of the required of our application here. We do have only one request for your consideration, as well as the approval of the conditional use permit. But within that consideration is with respect to the notation number 5, with the material of the structure. The accessory buildings are designed, architecturally designed, might I add, with the metal exterior covers. These are not tough sheds. This is a component in which we are looking to do, as you can see, create a faux wainscoting with different colors and an architectural element that will separate the two upper section and lower section to try to meet the intent, we believe, of the architectural requirements, but to do so in a manner that is easily maintained for us and consistent with the buildings that we have in other jurisdictions from a long-term management of our facilities. It just helps us to keep our costs down. I recognize that every applicant comes to you and says, I'm looking for some sort of special condition or special request. Our special request is that you would have consideration that with your conditional use approval of the conditional use, that we can move forward with not having to put additional wainscoting. It is a significant cost to us as a nonprofit enterprise. You as members, any dollar we spend, eventually goes into our rate base, and that's just the way it is. This facility is essential. Our service territory that's served from this facility goes all the way out almost to Buena Vista and Salida area. So, and it goes all the way up halfway to the Conifer section. So, and even into the Palmer Lake area. So it's an essential service for us to have the ability to operate and serve you as members. We're trying to also, we are not trying, but we are also building a newer facility in the Conifer area, very similar design and concept. So again, trying to keep everything consistent across our service area. So it keeps our management operations down. So I think those are the areas that I was going to ask for your consideration and respectfully request any questions that you have for us. And we're here to help.
Well, very good. Thank you. Yes, commissioners, any questions for applicant at this point?
Just to be able to understand that you agree with all the conditions expressed by the staff for the approval of the conditional use permit, except for condition number 5.
With the exception of 5, and I think I'd like to say we are open to have further conversations with the staff and the city to determine if there are other mediated solutions to our proposal with some architectural designs or color elements. We strongly feel that this building will be not visible from 95% of the public right of way. The folks from the north, the camping area, the fence will sit above grade from where they are because the grade goes up. So they won't even see probably more than 3 feet at the top of the building if you were to stand in that area. The folks at the church on the south side with the parking area, the actual principal structures, steel structures would be obscured from the parking area, not only with the fence, but then you have the parking with the, like I mentioned, the trellis type of canopy. And so that'll be obscured. And then from the rear with the residential side, again, with the fence, and it's pushed further into the lot. We think that visually they won't see more than just the top few feet of the buildings on that. I think that was the other element that was important to address is we're open to suggestions. We just were asked respectfully if there'd be consideration we can maintain working with the staff for elements associated to the steel design.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to know 3 or 4 things about the current state and the future state. The employee count, what it is and what it's going to, any hour of operations changes from what it currently is to what it's going to, and the number of vehicles that currently operate out of the facility currently and what the future state looks like. So that I'll let you answer those before I go to the next.
So I'll start with hours of operation because I know that one. Hours of operation will be similar to what we have now. There's no change. I will say there is one change about the administrative side of our services. You'll start seeing notices as members that we're no longer accepting walk-in payments with cash. A lot of folks do that. They drop off checks. Again, we get very few at this location. We've only had 10 visitors and none of them are, to our knowledge, are dropping off checks. So that's going away. Folks have other ways to pay in person. They can go to 7-Elevens and all this other stuff. So that foot traffic will probably be reduced from that perspective. As far as staff members, I'm going to look at one of my team members who might know the answers on that. So please.
Currently at 22, our 10-year projection is to be at 30. Sorry. Again, my name is Christine Willie-Matney. We are currently at 22 staff members, and our 10-year projection for growth is to ultimately be at 30 staff members. With respect to the amount of traffic that is currently frequenting the site, we're actually have a subcontractor who is utilizing the back half of our property as well. They will be leaving, and CORE will be staffing the site entirely. And so there will actually be a potential reduction in the actual movement of vehicles through this development by the contractor leaving the site and only CORE operating there.
And what are the hours of operation currently?
Our current area operations are 8 to 5 at all of our administrative offices. Now that's for, again, public access. For utility purposes, we're 24/7 in the sense of, if there's emergency outages, our crews do use the facilities for that. But for public administrative access, it's 8 to 5 p.m., 8 in the morning, 5 p.m.
And I guess the other question was, what are the new functions that'll be part of this that aren't currently there? I know fueling is maybe a new one, but what else?
Good question. So we currently do have fueling. The current fueling facilities will be taken from out of the ground, as mentioned by staff, and we'll get all the process and appropriate permitting and conditions to meet those obligations. There will still be fueling there, but it'll just be above ground tanks. So those will be accessible and more safely operated. I'm sorry, the second part of your.
Just any other functions,
Oh, so
different repairs, different.
yeah, so we have
services or anything like that?
our truck storage, equipment storage. In the rear part of the section, as was mentioned, there'll be training facilities for our linemen and field personnel, as well as we will have equipment storage and maintenance and fit out. A lot of times they bring the stuff inside because it's warm and they get started to kind of fit it out, and then they load it on their trucks and then they take it out into the field for operational installations. So it's the same amount of work. It's just that we're getting larger, so we need more space to actually prepare and do our work in this method.
And the new outdoor storage areas, is that growing from what's currently there, I presume, since they're new? The
Square
pole
footage
storage, material storage in the canopy area?
Yes,
Those things are all new.
yes.
Okay.
We have limited storage now. And as I mentioned, because that limited storage area, it's not as effective for us to be as reactive to outages.
Yeah, so can you describe, or at least give us some context as to why you have two separate heated parking buildings? What drove that decision?
I'll look to my architect. Thank you.
Yes, Doug Hahn with LKA Partners. Actually, no, we have one heated parking building.
Oh,
That second smaller building is unheated.
okay,
So they will keep their line trucks, their diesel trucks in the heated parking area so that they are ready to go 24/7. They'll keep some lesser used equipment, diggers, backhoes, trailers in that unheated area.
okay. So it's unheated.
Yes.
That's why they're separate.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And a reason for doing the separation versus combining them together. I mean, something as simple as a sprinkler system. If they were combined, that unheated area would have to be sprinkled. That's another maintenance concern,
Okay,
having pipes that you're trying to keep the water out of so they don't freeze.
right. Okay.
Do you have any questions? No. Lee, anything at this point?
Do not.
So I do. In the event that we're not able to pass this, is there any idea or thought of what you'll do?
I'm gonna look to
Not
my
that I'm trying to
project.
say that, but
No,
I'm
no,
asking as a
think,
look.
you know, to that end, we've evaluated multiple sites the past 2 years, not only in this jurisdiction, but other jurisdiction. And this site is the most appropriate for us to expand on based on the fact that we currently own it and it does have the capacity. So to your end, I don't think we're going to give up in the sense, but it also is, it's something that we have to still make for our members, the most important fiduciary responsibility to them and to you, you know, as a member citizen in the city. So, you know, if this was not approved, we would have to go back and have those discussions with our leadership and determine what our next steps or options may be. But, you know, this site does provide us everything that we currently need and we need for the future. And I think that was recognized when we bought it years ago. You know, I think it was even before some of the zoning was even defined, you know, it was a lot different back then in this jurisdiction. And the same thing up with our other facility where we're placing that. We actually are moving to a different location than we currently are because the land doesn't allow us to grow. And so that facility we actually moved off. So we have done a due diligence on the land acquisition, and this one just seemed to make sense still.
And if we hear that there's opposition from maybe any of the residents, would there be maybe the thought or maybe to add more trees kind of in the back or something if there's concern back there for what they're seeing and hearing? Would you take a few from the front to add to the back, or maybe just add a few more, or?
I'll ask my architect.
Okay.
Yes, actually, compared to the site plan that was displayed, we've already made some landscape adjustments. So along the south side of the property, adjacent to the church property, we are doing more evergreens and more trees there. Along the west end, there are two things happening there. We are adding more trees along the west side of the detention pond. The trees that are at the southwest corner are existing, and there's some very nice large ones there. So we're avoiding grading that corner. Another element on that west end is that from the residential property line to the plane of the storage yard, there's about an 8-foot vertical rise. So if you're in the backyard of those residences, again, you know, you look across your fence, well, the storage yard is higher than your fence by a couple feet. And then there's a 6-foot fence going on top of it. And then we have this 150 foot deep landscape area. So there's quite a buffer and a vertical change there that shields from view the residentials.
Thank you.
You got a couple more?
Yeah, I got 2 questions. Is there an existing detention pond back there?
I don't believe there is, no.
So this would be something that's useful for taking care of your drainage as well as providing a aesthetic amenity. And number 2, and excuse me for my ignorance, but what's a wainscot?
Oh, so I'll defer to staff, but our understanding of wainscoting is a architectural element that'll be roughly 4 feet high across a building that's made of material that's different than metal. So maybe CJ has a better definition for that.
They have the chair rail that comes up, and then they have all the like little slats. That's wainscoting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Different material.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, when we looked at that provision in our codes, you know, we just want to see 2 separate construction materials. So if you put that, you know, 4 or 5 foot high, different material, we could, you know, wainscot, you know, say concrete masonry units or something like that, and then metal. That would be 2 separate materials, and that would adhere to our codes.
And if I may, we've evaluated an estimate with our building contractor, and it's a roughly $500,000 cost to put a different architectural building material compared to steel, where we can run an architectural, I'll call it like a chair rail, or for lack of better architectural words, across it, and then distinct the 2 elements with coloring. You know, darker color, lighter color. We've also discussed as a team that we're not married specifically to colors. So if there's suggestions that staff would have to better mimic an architectural design that would provide that differentiation, we were totally open to working with the team on that. We've also looked at, so that was more of a brick wainscoting, then we looked at a stucco wainscoting, and that was around $400,000 of additional cost between using the steel materials.
When you mentioned colors, I saw the color rendering here. We had the renderings of the office building, but not of the, and it looks rather dark from this perspective. I didn't know if you're proposing any colors for that building.
Yes, I believe CJ, maybe you had it in your packet.
Yeah, we did have renderings
Was that-
of
you're right,
both
you
the
did, I'm
buildings
sorry.
within the packets. Yeah, I can put it on the screen if you guys would like.
Believe it's page number.
Yeah, there was some colored elevations, and then there was that additional true rendering of the very front of the building that faces the street.
Right, so-
that, provided more detail.
I guess from this looks like a beige-ish type wainscot and then a darker brown rather than it appears black in this rendering. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the lower part in the, it's page 9, at least in the handout I have, its lower part is a lighter color, the upper part darker. Again, unless we go to truly customized paint colors, we're not adverse to getting a recommendation on the paint or the coloring that you might recommend for this, and work with the staff to present that.
And for the record, the rendering on the screen here is directly from the staff report on page 9.
Yes. Okay, thank you. We talked about fencing, the screening type. It's on the west property line and the south property line, or is it all north as well?
All around. So in the front, it'll be an ornamental. So in the administration building, frontage will be an ornamental type of steel rail type of fence. Around the back sides, it'll be more of a traditional, I guess we call it a lattice chain link fence, which has some obstructions so people can't view through it.
You know what the material you're proposing for that? Is it I've seen some woven plastic, it looks like, and some that's a little bit more substantial and rigid. And I didn't know what you might be proposing.
I'll let Doug speak to the elements of the material.
Thank you.
I'd like to get in those photos a little bit.
Okay.
So as mentioned, on the highway side, from the northwest corner of the northeast corner of the building to the north
Oh.
property line will be this ornamental fence, really trying to dress that up. Then along the north property line, west and south, and then returning to the south side of the building will be a chain link fence with the vertical slats in it to make it more obscure. And that is what exists already on the south side of the property. You can see from this photo. So what we tried to do here is give a sense of what is or isn't seen. And you can see they have the existing fence, which is fairly deep into the core property. You'll see there's a horizontal green line going across there, which would be representative of the top of the 6-foot fence on the property line. And this, I was standing in the church parking lot, just inside the parking lot. So with that existing building, from the above the fence, you're seeing basically just the roof from that vantage point. The wainscot, you can see somewhat through that semi-opaque fence. You get a sense of the change of color, but the materiality is completely obscured. So, whether it was, well, no matter what it was masonry, stucco, metal, it all, in my opinion, would look basically the same because it's just a change of color is all you can see. The next photo, I went deeper into the church site. Again, you can see the green line cutting across there. This is about halfway into the parking lot. So you're elevating a bit so you can see a bit more of that existing building. Again, this south wall that you're seeing of that existing building is about in the line of what would be the north wall of the new building. So the south wall of the new building would be closer to you. So as it's moving closer because of the line of sight, you are seeing less of it vertically. Okay. So again, the wainscot, you can kind of see the color change through there, but you can't really distinguish the material. The next photo was taken from the back door of the church, which you're the highest and seeing the most of the building, but still what you're seeing, what you can see is above the level of the wainscot. So once again, we're just saying our assertion is change of color is more than adequate for giving the visual impression that the code is trying to achieve, because you can't distinguish what material it is. And I think the next photo we took from the north side, from the campground. So you're standing at the campground level. It's 5.5 feet. It's up to eye level before you are at the plane of the driveway. Then you put a 6-foot fence on top of that. So you're really looking uphill. And I'm sorry, I'm describing the wrong thing here. This is a view from Highway 67 from the edge of the pavement. So as you would be driving south on Highway 57 at 55 miles an hour, you get these glimpses through some pretty thick trees from the campground and the very north edge of the core property. The next photo is the one point, there's the width of the driveway where there's no landscaping. You can see deeper into the site. What I sketched in here, you can see some yellow cones. That one yellow cone is what would be the corner of the building, of the new building. And then you can see a green line going vertical out of that. That's more or less basic building form. So as you're driving by, you get maybe 1/10 to 1/4 of a second of view deeper into the site that is partially obscured by this ornamental fence, the gate. And you're looking pretty much just parallel down the face of the building for that fraction of a second. So yes, the next photo is from the campground side, where you are standing lower, looking up to the looking up to the level of the drive, and then it's the fence above, and the building beyond is actually, the new building will be another 35 feet farther from the fence than this one is. So that this fence also will have those slats in it to where you get that obscuring of the view.
So the building beyond has a color changed wainscot.
Yes,
That's
yes.
what the brown band is we're seeing.
Yes, and this is existing. When they constructed this building, they did the color change. On 2 walls, they just changed metal color. On the other 2 walls, they did a plywood pressboard siding and painted it a different color. It is not weathering well. So that would not be an appropriate change of material.
Do you plan on having barbed wire throughout the whole top?
Yes, yes, for the sake of security. They have had break-ins and intruders.
Is there going to be security on site?
There will be security cameras. I don't think they have security staff.
Just curious.
So again, our opinion is that there's really no vantage point where you actually, without an obstructed view, can see this wainscot material. You can only see a color change from the surrounding properties. So we're thinking that there is not necessarily a benefit to make that material change and spend the additional money that was mentioned to get it.
So CJ, can I ask you just for clarification? It has to be 2 separate different materials.
Correct. Yeah, and I
So
can,
it can't.
Well,
look
let's review
different,
that section
still
if we could.
be-
yeah, if I could, I can pull up the specific section of the codes. Let me stop sharing and then I'll put it right back on the screen here. Bear with me. So again, this is section 18.33 of the City of Woodland Park Municipal Codes. So this is H architectural design guidelines. Number 3 states that the primary use of prefabricated metal for an entire structure, panelized flat plywood, and highly reflective materials for facing materials is prohibited. So that's the specific code section that staff was referencing.
Karen, just as a point, we as a planning commission don't decide on code issues, right? That's the board of review would have to give them an exception for a code issue if they wanted to take exception to something in the code for a minor variance.
For something like that, where it is pretty blatant and straightforward, that would typically be Board of Adjustment in terms of if they disagreed with how staff was interpreting the code. The reason I'm kind of sounding a little, I guess, waffly is, based on the other interpretation of 2 principal uses that we were talking about, the creative interpretation there that I'm reasonably comfortable with. In this one,
Because I know we had
Yeah.
a previous discussion on I think it was a conditional use permit where there were some code issues. And we said that we would approve the conditional use permit as long as it meets the code or approved alternates by the building department, either the Board of Review or Board of Adjustment. I don't know which one. And it was, we would say, if you get the building department to approve your building permit, that you're meeting the code, we're okay with the conditional use, we'll permit that or approve that, but you have to get it approved by the building department. So a code issue that they're talking to us about, we wouldn't necessarily decide. That would go to the Board of Review for a minor, or I guess, according to what I'm reading, or the Board of Adjustment. And they would make a decision on whether they would approve the permit to build that building without the 2 differential materials as at their request. Is that not the way the procedure would work?
Or city council, there's variances built into plat approvals that we've done before. The city council.
and that's part of where our code is very complicated. And I don't have it all memorized to be able to, very firmly say, yes, this, no, that. So I'm not prepared for that pop quiz. I would feel more comfortable if I was able to research that again and make sure it wasn't buried somewhere. I actually found something the other day in subdivision rule that it's like, oh, who knew city council could vary that, because it's like in a very weird, obscure place. It was very intriguing.
See, where you're coming from, Ken, I agree. I don't think even if we accept the points being made that it's unusually expensive for a building that may not be very visible and such, and perhaps there is an argument for it. We're not the ones to decide that. I guess we could send a recommendation along the city council saying we recommend that because of these circumstances, the city council approve proceeding without variance to the design guidelines, or as you say, they could go to the Board of Adjustment and get a variance as well.
I mean, the other example is accepting a building height issue. We've done that. That's not,
No,
that's with the planned unit development, though. That's a different.
And PUD. So
PUD.
that if you want to make your house
That
31,
falls to us.
if you want to make your house 31 feet high, you go to the Board of Adjustment.
Okay, it's not the Board of Review, it's the Board of Adjustment.
Yeah. Board of Review does construction.
Building code.
Building code variances from minor.
This is not building code.
Okay, Board of Adjustment. All right.
And just so it is clear, I forget who was saying, it might have been you, Lee, that the PUD is, I jokingly call it a designer zoning district, where you set up your terms and parameters for what you want for setbacks, building height, that kind of thing.
That's right.
So within a PUD, if somebody says, I want to change my maximum building height, that comes back through planning commission and city council as a part of changing the overall parameters that apply to the PUD itself. Within a established zoning district, there's very clear criteria in terms of the maximum building height is 30 feet or 30 feet. And in that situation, if somebody wants to vary that standard that's established, that request goes to the Board of Adjustment.
Yeah. Okay,
So,
thank you.
yeah.
Sorry.
No,
We're still on your
I'm
time,
learning
but-
as well.
And then with things that do go to the Board of Adjustment, there's a list of criteria that have to be met. And it's very specific. And this I do remember, financial constraints are not a contributing factor to be considered as part of granting of a variance.
And I just wanted to make sure I'm clear, because I think CJ, when you put up the section 1833, that it indicated that this is just a facade. This is not, this doesn't have to be a structural wall change, right? This is looking at a facade that makes it look like there's two different materials. I believe the design of the facade, visible front street, shall be blah, blah, blah. Right?
Right, yeah, so you're referencing number 4 here on this list under
Yeah.
architectural design
Right.
guidelines. That's correct on number 4. The one staff was calling out in the staff report was specifically number 3 and the primary use of prefabricated metal structure for an entire structure. That's the one that I would call out if I were
Okay.
to explain that. provision.
So you're considering it, the actual primary wall needs to change, the material on the wall needs to change.
Correct.
Okay.
Without moving the screen here, can you scroll up and get over to the previous section before the guidelines?
And the roof is metal as well, right?
Yes.
What I was looking for was how the guidelines are to be applied. And what I see is
Oh,
that was the only section dealing with design standards.
On
correct?
top.
Yeah.
Okay,
at the very top of 18.33.180. That says design standards, intent and purpose. That I think is what you're looking for. Is
Yeah.
what is the intention behind all these different things, including, site density, and I think there's landscaping and other criteria. So that's the part that CJ's gotten us to now.
okay. Just seeing if there was any revisions in there to give a little bit of latitude.
Since it's mostly not visible from the street, paragraph 4 doesn't apply, which says it should provide the appearance of quality or permanence. So I guess that's not a requirement.
If I may call out one area, I think, CJ, if you don't mind going down to the section at like 5, 6, 7, all those, scroll down. I think what we've tried to do in the development, thank you, is it's not just a flat panel steel wall throughout the whole element of the design. We've broken it up with doors, windows, and other elements that are architecturally different from, say, just a straight steel facade. And that may provide some relevance to this discussion because of number 5, it's required. But if you look at number 7, it says that you should use colors and different things to differentiate the building. So in that respect, in looking at it, since the building is not only steel, it does have other architectural components. And we have tried to address those architectural components in a manner that is consistent with.
What's the material of the overhead doors?
Metal and glass. Windows are glass. So I mean, what I'm trying to address is we believe the building doesn't fit what I think most people think of a prefab standard steel shack. It is architecturally designed to
So
Give
can you
some sense.
explain why it's architecturally designed beyond just a standard metal building?
Yeah, I think the way that it's been constructed from the reference that the elements with the use of the doors, with the use of the structure, it does not look like a storage bin. And I think really that's the
I
element of it.
disagree. I do believe it looks like a metal building. Any questions for applicant? Oh, I guess I did have one question. I believe CJ made comment about sidewalk. Is there any improvements along 67?
There is proposed improvements along 67. That was a comment that our engineer stated, so just slight design changes within the sidewalk design. So yeah,
There will
again,
be a sidewalk along 67.
that is correct. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
And again, that will be assessed during the final site plan and construction document phase of the application. Or of a separate application.
I guess at this point, we may call you back for further questions.
Thank you for your
We'd like
consideration.
to open the public hearing. So we'd give the opportunity to anybody in the public who would like to make comment. It looks like most of you are associated with the applicant. But you have the opportunity to speak as well. Do we have anybody online by chance?
We have no hands raised, Commissioner.
Okay, again, anybody in the public online who'd like to make comment? This would be your opportunity. Please raise your hand. This one final chance. Seeing nobody in the audience and nobody raising their hand online, the public hearing portion of this meeting is closed. So any questions for staff at this point? Can we address? I guess you have the opportunity to rebuttal, but since there's no comments, I'm assuming you have no further comments, but you have that opportunity. Thank you. Any comments, questions for staff? I guess I do have a. Let me clarify the landscape and the 25% adjacent to residential. Is that just on the west property, or does that also include the church property zone residential on the south?
Correct, yeah. Let me pull up my staff report, Commissioner, and we can talk through that here. So. So I'm looking specifically at the zoning map here on the right-hand side of the screen. As background in the community commercial zone, 25% of the site must be landscaped. Half of that 25%, if abutting residentially zoned areas must be on those residential zoned areas. It doesn't specify if it's abutting one property line or two or three or four. So we were looking at half of that 25% landscaping has to be abutting residentially zoned properties. So that's specifically here on the west side and on the south side.
And those are the changes they stated that they made, right?
Correct, yep.
So it does comply with that requirement.
Staff hasn't seen any specific landscape plans from the applicant with the change that they alluded to. All we've seen was the this. I can pull up the.
It was ask the applicant if they could make comment on that, please.
Okay, yes. So the way it turns out, there is the residential zone on the west, the church property zone residential, and across the highway to the east is residential. When I put together, honestly, I made a mistake. When I put together this request, I was looking at it in terms of the only residential abutting we had was that west side. So we were trying to get all 50% in that narrow frontage on the back, and it was getting incredibly deep. So in reality, we haven't done the math, but because of the southern exposure and the eastern exposure, we have far more than the required 50% abutting residential zones. So we just have to redo the math.
Okay, very good. Appreciate the clarification. Any questions, comments, discussion?
I'll just comment that I don't have any issue with the conditional use that they're proposing and their planned use on the site nothing that is objectionable to me. I think that there's a request that needs to be made for the alterations to the code that doesn't come through us necessarily on a conditional use permit, but maybe Larry or somebody knows differently, but so again, I'm kind of leaning on that. I find the use acceptable as long as they are able to meet the code or get acceptable agreement from the Board of Adjustment to alter those items that don't comply. They either comply or they get permission to build it that way from somebody else other than us, either the city council or the Board of Adjustment. I don't see that as in our purview, but the use of the site, I don't have any issue with. My comment.
Just to clarify, the points of non-compliance are the.
building materials.
primary Building materials.
Yes, the number of accessory buildings and the building materials. Those are two that I'm aware of,
The building materials
but all metal.
may well be at least potentially addressed in discussions going on. I think it's already, that issue is already addressed by the proposed staff conditions, anticipating that there'll be discussion and a resolution of it too. If the staff's not satisfied that the design meets the code, then
Yeah, it was in the conditions that they change it. And I'm just saying they either change it or they get permission to build it that way from the proper authorities
if
in the
they're not
building
able-
department.
If they're not able to work that out with the city staff,
Right.
they can go to the Board of Adjustment and ask. Or
Right.
otherwise, but
There's a step for them to pursue, I think, to request that adjustment. We wouldn't approve it and drop the condition 5. In other words, your condition would be maybe modified to either change the materials to comply or request an appropriate adjustment to that condition so that you could build it the way you've designed it without having to comply, an adjustment. So that's just my comment on where I'm at.
on the other issue, I wrote up some language here and tell me if people hate it or love it, including Karen, even adding as an item 6. Unless determined by the city attorney to be unnecessary, comma, the ordinance approving this conditional use permit shall acknowledge city council approval of the proposed number of accessory buildings, notwithstanding city code 18.21.045. And the city attorney says that this was not excessively creative, and that'll go, then.
But
Nina's on the call. She was.
I like what I heard too.
Look at my wording or something.
Yes, Larry, go ahead.
I like what I heard about having the applicant and the staff come together and try to come to an agreement first. And then I think provision number 5 alludes to that. And I think that's what we need to do. Then if there's an impasse and agreement cannot be made, then the Board of Adjustment for that particular standard could be requested to be varied. And I too, like Ken just said too, a few minutes ago, that this is a good project. It makes sense to do this. I just don't see any major concerns. This is a concern dealing with design, and certainly that is an important factor. At the same time, it's not a factor that should weigh in whether or not this project should or should not be approved.
I would agree. I think you've already alluded to, you might do it, but maybe shifting a few of the trees towards the back, so the true residents who are there 24/7 don't get to see as much as that. I think I'd be. Okay.
So I guess further discussion, yes, from my perspective, I support the project. I'm concerned about some of the details as has been expressed as exceptions, but I would like to see it move forward. So if no other comment or discussion, I guess we're looking for a motion. Yes,
So quickly, I would like to interject. I appreciate your drafting an additional condition 6. But I would suggest, and this is, I've been really clear about being a little rusty on current planning and development review items and such. So we probably could have written our recommendations slightly better in terms of the approval of the conditional use permit and site plan to renovate the building. I think that the preliminary site plan as presented is implied but not overtly stated in terms of the recommendation that staff put out. So that implied, staff or site plan as presented includes the 2 main buildings and the 2 accessory structures in the director's opinion. For whatever that's worth.
I'm sorry, did you propose some revised wording? I didn't.
No, I was proposing you didn't need condition 6 in my opinion, because I think it's implied that the approval staff is recommending that you recommend is the site plan as presented, which includes the 2 primary buildings and 2 accessory structures.
I think Lee was trying to express that as an exception to these typical interpretation. And just
Okay.
making that clear. And that's part of our recommended approval if we move forward with that.
That was, thank you.
Right, because are there other buildings along there that we've asked them to make those changes to? That could be,
Are you speaking of this specific proposal or just in the past?
in this, yes, in the past, in this specific area that could come back and say, well, hey, you made me do all this, and
Well,
just out of curiosity.
not to our knowledge, but we're both, only got like 18 months time in here, me being the long termer.
And I believe
So
It's what Lee's trying to say, so.
yeah, in the past building permits were pulled in, I think 1998 and 2003 or 4, somewhere around there. So it's been a bit since anything's been constructed on.
So the building count, there's already structures on the property that are staying also, right? That metal building that we saw in the pictures? Or is it coming down? So it's only these buildings? Okay,
So the metal structures that currently there will be removed. in
Okay.
the new building.
I knew it was, all right. Thank you. You did say that earlier. So Karen's point about 2 primary buildings with accessory buildings, 2. We could word Lee's comment that it recognizes city council approves this as interpreted was 2 primary buildings and 2 accessory buildings, or 1 primary building and additional accessory buildings beyond 2 of 3.
My general sense was that unlike some other topics which have been raised, our role is to interpret Title 18. That's
Yeah,
the zoning ordinance, among other things. Not to change it, but interpret. We weren't really disagreeing with CJ's interpretation, but some working on exactly, they can perhaps work out some accommodation of what it is. We're not so clear, and we agree upon the meaning of how many accessory buildings are. It seems there's a limitation which may apply. And for us to just sort of say nothing about it, let it go through and nothing ever come up on it. If we think it fully complies, we don't have to say anything. If we think it doesn't fully comply, you need to
But
get
there
it
would be a
compliance.
question if
But
anybody looked
I'm
at it.
granting up front that if the city attorney says that it's fine, and it's fine, then the condition goes away. That was my thought. I'm not trying to impose a view on somebody else.
is there a extra long time you're gonna have to prepare now if we add that condition? Is that your concern or something that it's gonna be hard to explain or?
No, that's just,
Okay,
we'll work through it.
okay.
Yeah, if the city attorney says that it's not an issue, then it should go away. I built that into.
And I'm fine with that.
Yep.
I don't have any issue with the way you worded it. I just was trying to see if there's an accommodation that would make it seem to work better for staff in some way, or if there's a problem, if we leave it in there that way that we could accommodate. But I think I'm fine with it. So if we're ready to make a motion, it would be to move to accept staff's recommendation to approve the conditional use permit with the 5 conditions and the addition of condition 6 that we can read into the record off of Lee's comments. Is
Condition
that where we're at?
6. Are you making a motion or?
I'm just asking if that's where we're at and getting some nods. I think we are.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can make that motion. So I'll move to accept staff recommendation to approve the conditional use permit for Core Electric as presented tonight with the 5 conditions that staff has listed. And the addition of the 6th condition, which I'd like Karen to read.
Condition 6, unless determined by the city attorney to be unnecessary, the ordinance approving this conditional use permit shall acknowledge city council approval of the proposed number of accessory buildings, notwithstanding city code section 18.21.045.
That concludes my motion.
Then I'll second it.
This point of discussion before we move on to a vote. There was concern from the applicant on item 5. And that's your proposal is to keep that intact.
It's fine as the way it is. They can still request a adjustment to it, but it's part of the code. If they want to build there, that's got to be gone through the code process to get an adjustment to it. So I don't see any reason to revise it. It'll go forward and they'll work through the next step with the proposal, either to how do we provide an adequate solution for less than $500,000, hopefully, or get permission to build it with the metal and the paint, knowing the conditions of the site, how well it's visible, what other buildings have been there. You know, whatever the Board of Adjustment will review to making a suggestion or whatever. Or they can bring that up with the city council and ask it to be added if the city council wants to put it in the ordinance, I guess.
Okay.
But I don't think we need to alter the code or take that on.
We have any more further comment? We have a motion and a second. I guess we'd like to take a poll, commissioners.
Commissioner Brown,
Yes.
Don Zellum,
Yes.
George Jones,
Yes.
Ken Kennedy,
Yes,
Larry Larson,
Yes.
Sean Nelson,
Yes.
and Chairman Hartsfield.
Yes. Thank you, gentlemen, ladies, for your time tonight, and that concludes public hearing portion of tonight's meeting. We move on to a work session. Discuss short-term rental draft ordinance. We good to continue? Do we need a break?
This might be good.
Let's take a break till 10 after.
Oh, thank you, sir.
We're good, thank you. Thank you. I'll back to order here. Meeting for the first of June meeting.
Real quick, you can get your microphone.
Thank you, CJ. Let's proceed further with tonight's meeting and we'll go to our work session concerning short-term rental draft ordinance. Aaron, do you have a presentation or discussion for us?
I can at least frame the conversation for you all. And before we dive into that, actually, just so we can relax to the rhythm of the leaking ceiling, I did send in a work order. And I do appreciate the creativity put a trash can under it. So if it crashes down while we're talking, I've done all I can.
Oh, Jenny.
No, the rest of the ceiling's standing. We're gonna like hang in there and go with it. So, okay, short-term rentals. It was back in September when this particular item was in front of Planning Commission and you held your public hearing on the ordinance and made a recommendation to City Council. And even before first reading or right at first meeting, City Council had made amendments and changes to the recommendation that came out of this particular commission. And that ordinance went through a variety of twists and turns, was adopted. And then it's since gone through a citizens referendum and has been repealed. And I don't remember the exact date when the repeal happened. February, I think, actually. So since then, and from a staff perspective, I've been very firm on behalf of the commission in terms of if you're sending something back to planning commission for them to look at and make recommendation on or ask them to readdress, we want clear policy guidance around what that looks like. Because that was part of the conversation when the ordinance first came out of planning commission and went to city council. There was discussion that they had not done that. So I didn't want that to all be ambiguous this time around. They had a work session back in March, and it was more just a general conversation. That was city council. And then there had been obviously a few months had gone by without any real activity, at least of all in a public format on that. And so they most recently had a work session again on June 1st on this particular topic. And in preparation for that June 1st work session, council asked for a copy of the original recommendation that came out of your public hearings in September. So that was where they started their conversation on last Thursday, June 1st. In your packet, there was a couple of different items that were brought to you. One was my memo that just kind of reframed again what an STR is, our lodging tax requirement for anything that's rented for accommodations for less than a 30-day time period. And then specifically calling out on the different pages where the changes occurred. And then in the packet, there was a very crude, old school red line, and then scan it back in to just highlight clearly the sections out of the ordinance that came out of this commission, exactly what sections were modified so that, because I know you folks would want to do this, you could lay that next to the version that came out of our attorney's office, where based on that guidance we got on June 1st, Nina put all that in to this version at this point in terms of what council is asking for changes and for consideration. So that's the pieces that were in your packet. I do have an additional sheet to talk about the caps, because that particular thing was not addressed in the items that went out in your packet. But I'm prepared to dive into that in more detail here. So at this point, I'm not sure if you would like to just go through the ordinance in a little more detail with where those changes were requested by council, or what your preference would be in terms of next steps in our conversation this evening.
I have just sort of factual question. There's been various requests by city council to the city staff to collect information. And I know it could be a somewhat of a moving target, but as a relatively current situation, we know how many short-term rentals there are in each zoning district. Do we know how many of those are owner occupied or non-owner occupied?
No, not to that last piece. Number of STRs and in what zone district? Yes. Owner
Okay.
occupancy? No.
And you also have number of dwelling units in each of those zones.
Yes, that's my spreadsheet. Give me a second.
Karen, you said there was a majority of the council was making these recommendations. We know what number? 4?
5.
Yeah, I'm not sure they were all 100% on one. They're generally on some, I mean,
It was
there were sort of
consensus.
5 similar,
Yeah.
but they were a little unclear, a little soft on a couple of the provisions.
It was consensus. It wasn't a hard firm vote, and there was a little. This was as firm as I was getting in terms of clear direction.
So,
So
Have they given us a direction, or they just give us corrections they'd like to see?
We have an ordinance that's been prepared by the attorney based on what they would like to see different.
Basically, it's a request for us to approve their modifications to our previous suggestions.
Yes.
Can you explain once you explain a little bit of the attorney draft you mentioned we got? I'm not sure. What is that? What is that? This other draft that the attorneys looked at? And
Oh, the one that said, forgot how I labeled it in the packet.
one that says ordinance number blank series 2023 without your red lines on it.
That's the one that the attorney did.
Yeah, this is the requested changes. The city attorney took those and already incorporated them into the ordinance. So that other document in your packet is a proposed ordinance for conversation
Where you
tonight.
put a red line in, he wrote it in, or she, to.
Right, so the red line comments are incorporated into the second copy.
Right, the second copy is the clean copy.
Yeah, so the rudimentary one with this, is that what you're talking
Right.
about? That was my redlining of your original recommendation from last September, just so you could see clearly what provisions out of your original recommendation were now the request for modification.
And let me just be clear, this file that you sent us, that's called ordinance STR regulations, parentheses, recommended by consensus of council on 6/1/2023, parentheses, 002, parentheses, .pdf. That's the document that's taking into account those red marks
Yes,
and given back to us at the city council said, give this back to the planning commission so that we could talk and discuss that recommendation and give opinions back to them on that ordinance.
no, I appreciate that question. Let me talk process here real quickly. Because this ordinance makes alterations to both Title V, which is business licenses, and Title 18, which is the zoning chapter. It's the 18 section that absolutely has to go through planning commission through a public hearing for recommendation by you all. They just so happen to have Title V things included in the same ordinance. So process wise, rather than just spring the ordinance on you at a public hearing, no good comes from that. I thought you would appreciate a work session to at least highlight and go talk about, this is the direction that council has given staff and asked us to bring to you that says, this is what's here. So mostly want you to become familiar with this. If there are changes or things you'd like to see different, speak up tonight. Because the 95% of this is what came out of this committee originally. I was hoping just one work session tonight. This is what we want different. And the public hearing for you all scheduled for June 29th at 6:30. And I'm right at a quorum with 5. So if you said yes to the meeting that night, you were obligated. There's no takebacks.
Okay.
Explain the necessity for a special meeting versus our next regular.
Well,
meeting.
I couldn't get it on our second meeting in June. I think that's the 22nd, because the deadline for newspaper publication was May 30th. Well, before the city council work session. And then the July 13th meeting was anticipating a pretty full schedule. As it is, I believe I got one item that dropped off. So I'm still at least 2 items on that particular meeting for public hearing that night. So some of it's a scheduling issue, some of it was a timing issue. And then city council did ask that this not languish, that it move along pretty quickly. So just trying to meet everybody's needs. Like I said, not surprised you guys at a public hearing. Hopefully you guys are comfortable. If there's things you want tweaked, we
For an
put that up.
overview, there's an initiative to put this issue on the ballot. Statuses on that.
There is a separate petition out there by a citizens group that is their own ordinance that they have written, that if they collect enough petition signatures, That goes through a different process. It's a citizen initiative that ordinance potentially lands on a ballot.
Does that supersede what we developed?
I don't know that it supersedes.
Assuming it passes in its full support.
I don't know the legal nuances of that. I do know guidance from the city attorney was that we were okay with parallel processes occurring. So
If both this ordinance we developed and the initiative ordinance, which one supersedes? I'm assuming the initiative ordinance would take precedence since it was a public vote.
that I don't know. I'd have to ask to get an answer for you on that. I just know that we're good to go forward with this.
Very good.
So
Any general questions at this point? Otherwise, I'd suggest maybe we go through the red line set and look at the changes that have been proposed by council for discussion. Then we can open up on the other discussion points that might be pertinent.
So to focus on the changes, it would be page 2, midway down the page, the definition of short-term rental unit. There had previously been a term in there towards the end of that first line of that definition that that the unit is rented or utilized. They had asked for the word utilized to be replaced with the term leased, so that it is rented or leased for furnishing lodging.
I'm okay with that.
Don't have an issue either.
No, okay.
Oh, one further, if we're gonna fix that sentence. It should say where it says rented, now it says rented or leased for furnishing, lodging, accommodation and occupancy. I'm not sure the difference between accommodation and occupancy, but it probably shouldn't have to be both. It's accommodation or occupancy. Since we're fixing.
That's a grammatical correction that's more accurate.
Yeah, I think.
Cross off the and put it over.
I think so. Either, if it's either occupancy or lodging, I think that's what either one is intended. If they're different.
We could do all kinds of things with that. We could do the or, we could take out occupancy and just leave accommodation. There's all kinds of.
Is that or it's minimal one?
That's
I like the
fine.
word and.
Or is better and is
No,
not
don't-
the correct logic
Never
term.
go in. I had a contracts manual years ago, had a full chapter called The Problems of and/or.
As
You
a
don't wanna
person
go
who
there.
interprets regulation, I will agree with that.
Okay, we'll go to page 3.
So, and I did hear you want the word or in there. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So page 3, it is item G regarding caps. The direction there was to revise those cap numbers for the zone districts to match our current data and to round up to a whole percentage. So on the screen is the current data. And actually, CJ, here real quick, I'll get you a paper copy too to make your life a little easier. I didn't come fully prepared. Could you run copies of that for everybody for me? But the table you're about to get a paper copy of, this is the data as of Monday, whatever day that was, the 5th, June 5th. Got this directly from Aaron Vasilati from the finance department, our finance director. And the gray band across the middle is the number of STR units by zone district. So that is exactly where we are. Those are the current numbers in terms of numbers of units. And above that gray line, you've got data that talks about the number of vacant lots in each of those zone districts, the number of developed lots, and then the total lots, which is both vacant and developed lots. So the total number of available lots within the suburban residential zone district is 1,857. There's 70 STR units in that zone district. And so when we split that apart and look at it As a percentage of developed lots, we were at 4.19 versus a percentage of the total lots in that zone district was 3.77. The recommendation that came out of Planning Commission last September was 4%. With council direction applying what they had suggested in terms of, rounding up. And from a staff perspective, I think it's prudent to look at it from the percent of the total number of lots in that district. So from that, that's how I filled in this dark green band showing 4% in that particular zone district.
But they're wanting us to go up more?
Well, if you look at the
Is that
percent,
recommendation?
STR percent of total lots is 3.77. So round up to the whole percent, which would be 4.
I'm confused. Did our proposed code say 3.77%?
No, right now it says 4.
I know, but what did it say originally when we said a percent?
I'm sorry, what?
What did it say originally when we said?
4. On this in your document, the numbers that are in yellow.
Yep.
That was not changed in the document that went to you all.
Okay.
Those things in yellow are what you sent to city council.
But what was, I guess I'm. Might be clearing everything. I don't understand what their recommendation for us changing it then.
Yeah.
is.
They wanted it changed to the current data. And so I'm talking about what is the current data at this point. The bottom line is it doesn't change much.
Our numbers came from current data of developed lots.
Right.
As of
And
September,
it was rounded somewhat. So 4.1 became 4, 7.45 became 8, 2.26 became 4. For whatever reason, PUD did not get cut down to 3. But that was just suggested percentages with the idea that the council would decide if they wanted to have it, 3.77 or whatever numbers would be when we sent it forward. But we picked reasonable caps
Yeah.
that would, slow the growth, slow the concerns about investors coming in and buying up properties, that kind of thing. So their percentage is 4, 7, and 1. Doesn't change a lot, just the opportunity for PUDs lots to be turned into SDRs. And so I'm fine with their recommendation. I think it's the intent of what we put in there, just slightly different, but not
Basically, we
materially.
discussed
It's-
maintaining the existing concentration.
right. And then, so
Does the same thing.
our target was we cap, so the growth is controlled. And then as STRs are weaned out to the good neighbor policies and the violation restrictions, there would be an opportunity for somebody to get a license. But again, they'd all have to operate within the bounds of the constructs of the good neighbor and all the rules. So this still follows the same intent, just slightly different math. So I'm fine with it.
I'm good with these numbers.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear.
Absolutely.
I'm not actually good with these numbers. And I'll say, I'm smarter now than I was a year ago. Circumstances are different. I've learned more about our community. Some of it's evolved too. I've had the picture map we have of the dots. And anytime I've shown this to someone, they potentially say, oh my God, they're all over the place. I think there are. I think we have too many, and as a place, we've heard some action by the city, an extraordinary action by the citizens. The kind of petition that was brought up last year. I don't think in the history of Woodland Park, such an action has ever occurred.
It was the
before.
first time.
I don't think the proper number is 0, but I think to say the number we've got now is the right number is too much. I think we all should be smarter to learn that's not where the population of the city is. I have a little more complicated views on what it would be. It's not simply lowering this number, but
I still haven't heard anything from anybody about how the problems that have been referenced what isn't accommodated by the ordinance, eliminating problem STRs.
well,
So
let's say so. The biggest problem is and
just to eliminate them.
I'll adopt the sort of the catchphrase that was used.
We also discussed this about how do you pick which ones go away?
Oh, well, I'll tell you.
So
All right.
But I mean, I'm just saying, we had this conversation.
The catchphrase which the citizens group developed was, you can't have a neighborhood without neighbors.
Yep.
And I believe that. I also.
But we also decided that there's vacation homes that have been here for 90 years. There's still neighbors that don't live there.
Exactly.
It's always going to be that way. It's Colorado. It's a tourist state. So we got to accommodate some of that.
And actually, I think where I think I'm at today, is I really, part of what happened last year was I went along with groups, so we had a unanimous view when there was a tabula rasa before, starting from nothing. I do think, and this is actually mirroring Rusty Neal's comments on it that he had at the last work session, is that people who in good faith bought properties for using as short-term rentals, the commercial short-term rental and such. I'm not sure we have to, but I think it seems fair and appropriate to allow them to continue indefinitely. And so what I would envision is something is a reduced number, and a cap doesn't have to be the way you do have a different thought, but not trying to impair the situation of current owners. As those change over time, some number will go away. Some, those that have been vacationing for 70 years probably will continue for a long time.
So your idea is more of an organic, getting down to the cap, whatever number you're.
So stay, this is our target number. We're going to reduce it, but
Legacy, yeah, there's a legacy.
existing owners, their legacy.
Is legacy. And if in fact 10 years from now, I don't think every 2 years, but if 10 years from now, that doesn't look right, one could raise the number some. But it's a whole lot easier to raise the number than to lower the number.
Well, we're doing it now. If we lower it,
No, we wouldn't be lowering it.
we're setting it
We're
below
setting it for the
the
first
current
time
level.
and giving a legacy arrangement. At least that's
Yeah.
what,
Okay.
I'll tell you something further in this, like, I'm not sure one needs to have the same kind of calculation of how many housing units there are and such and percentages, and the planning department keeping up on, new plats and such. There should be a number less than what it is now. But I also, notwithstanding my thinking there are too many STRs. And I'm not the first one to raise this point, but owner occupiers in my mind, who, whether they're currently in the house or on vacation in Florida or during the time, their houses are principal residences.
Primary residence, yeah.
And if in your principal residence, you do some lodging business, it's more like an accessory use, it's limited use. And that is of a different character, and it has a different impact on the neighborhood than a commercial property.
I agree with you.
So I would not wish to cap those. If you or somebody other neighbor says, wants to rent out space in their principal residence, I would not cap it. So if you believe that, the first thing that should happen is the number you're looking at isn't 70 SR in SR. The number is 70 minus the owner occupiers, 10 or 20 that might be owner occupiers. So it's 50 or 40 or some other number. And maybe you reduce that a little more. And owner occupiers could always do it, because that, it's their house. And it doesn't present the same negative impact on the neighborhood as a commercial property.
So the only loophole that I see in your situation that would affect somebody negatively is somebody who does not have a house. That if they sold it to the next owner, it's suitable for other use other than an STR. The cabins that we've referenced that are in here for 90 years. Those don't have long-term lodging capability. They can't be rented long-term. So you give a legacy license for STR to the current property owner, but the next property owner says, I want to buy this cabin, but I can never rent it out to somebody else because the STR licenses don't apply.
I can't help.
But they won't buy it, and you're devaluing the guy's ability to sell that property.
Extraordinary cases.
It's a narrow,
There's some house
issue.
that's not suitable as a house,
yep. So there's just a few that are in that category.
really small.
It's very small.
Okay,
And again, that's where
So-
maybe the legacy provision comes in.
Yeah, so.
But he's saying the legacy only applies, when we talked about this earlier, it was only applying to the existing
I
owner.
know, but we would be a little inventive here and
We might be able to accommodate that, but that's the only thing.
No, I understand. At least my view here is throwing a monkey wrench into the works too, but I don't think we're required to start where we were 9 months ago or 8 months, whatever it was, in September of last year, and say that's where we have to work from, because
No,
as I say, I admit my views have changed. One of the example of things I was worried about clustering of STRs. I had a distance rule. A lot of people didn't like that in different ways. I thought it was interesting. A distance rule isn't so crazy that it doesn't appear in the accessory dwelling unit provision. Accessory dwelling units have a rule about the density of accessory dwelling units within a 600 radius of applicant's property if you're in an SR, and a 300-foot distance if you're in UR, which are longer distance. Now, it didn't say one, it said 10% could have accessory dwelling units. But so distances aren't that unusual, and somebody had to come. Frankly, I think the outline I just suggested about allowing owner occupiers and a fixed number of commercial STRs and continuing indefinitely. I think that's a better way to go than the distance one too, but I mean, understand it's the bad part is when a neighborhood gets filled with a whole bunch of these, when they're lined up 3 or 4 in a row, as happens a block from where I live. In fact, 2 blocks from where I live.
All of them or something.
go ahead.
Top of Ponderosa, there's 4 in a row.
Excuse me. What I'd like to suggest is, let me finish going through all of the changes, and then we can circle back to, well, purely caps. You know, and what you want that to look like, and some of your other issues and concerns may get answered as we go through the rest of this,
Yeah.
just to get all the
Yeah,
information.
we're
on the
wandering into
table.
the other paragraphs real well on some of this.
So.
So to summarize the percentages, 4, 7, and 1 as appropriate to each zone base is what's being proposed by council at this point.
Is my understanding of what they were asking for, yeah.
So I'm fine with that, but I also am open to discuss Lee's suggestions on caps. That makes sense.
Revisit that.
So we'll do that.
Let's, yeah,
Move on to page 4.
Yep.
so. This is a page that had a couple of changes here. So, and it did get re-lettered because of those particular changes. So the first one is K, definitely got adjusted, because previously that operating an STR in your accessory dwelling unit was not permitted. So in this situation, the proposal is to change it so that accessory dwelling units, which are not located, and it's because it's listed as what's prohibited, things that are prohibited, TPs, RVs, blah, blah, blah. So where you can't have an STR is an accessory dwelling unit, which is not located on the license holder's primary residence. So basically, if I have my house and I have an ADU, and that is not my primary residence, the house, I cannot use the ADU for a short-term rental. If I'm living in my primary house, then I can use the ADU as a short-term rental.
It's actually more fundamental than that. If you're not living there, it's not an ADU. It has to be owner occupied. This, by the way, if we do this, we're creating a conflict in our ordinances because 1833-135 D2 of the ordinances is this talking about ADUs. No rooms in the owner's unit may be rented. The ADU shall not be sold separately from the entire property, including the primary unit, and shall not be sublet. So
That's why they ended up being prohibited.
yeah, I just say, so if we're gonna tinker with that, we're gonna have to go tinker with the accessory dwelling unit rules.
That's an interesting one. ADU cannot be sublet in Woodland Park.
Well,
I think
okay,
that's
sublet
probably
is.
violated quite a
No,
bit.
no. Sublet is, I've rented out my ADU, I've got a tenant in there. That tenant cannot further rent that out to somebody else. Because they need to be, they don't want to live there. Yeah, the
Right.
tenant cannot sublet the ADU. That's what that's supposed to be saying.
Is that what is it? Is that what it means?
That would be my interpretation, because it's very common when you lease a property that they say no subletting.
Rent the unit out.
You can rent, it's a
landlord can
primary
rent it
rental,
out.
not a sublease.
But the
Yeah.
tenant can't subsequently rent it to a different person. That would be.
Read
my-
it again, Lee, please.
The ADU shall not be sold separately from the sale. Sorry, no rooms in the owner's unit may be rented. The ADU shall not be sold separately from the sale of the entire property, including the primary unit, and shall not be sublet.
Okay, so the primary unit, no renting of rooms, and then that not being subletted, I kind of implies it can be rented,
Right.
but not
Okay.
subleased.
Okay, no, I guess that works and
That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right.
It's just a
So
little quirky
as
in
long as
wording.
the owner occupier is. The owner occupier elsewhere, it says could live in the primary or the ACU, but because of the net result is the owner has to live in the principal one. And
Not renting it out. and then renting-
And can't rent one of their own rooms, has to rent a room.
Yeah.
Okay, as long as it's all constrained there. I mean, I don't know how much of that goes into this ordinance, the new ordinance, and how much of it is just. If you do it in an ADU, you still got to do your annual certifications that your ADU is qualified. So I guess you don't write a whole lot of it in there.
So back to that change then, I'm okay with that. That doesn't bother me.
I
Other
don't
than,
understand the reasoning for that change. Was there anything expressed?
we were excluding ADUs from being short-term rentals. And they're just saying, I think Rusty was
Basically
one that
saying
brought it up.
ADUs can be rented out.
They don't exclude it.
Yeah, they're just,
And ADUs are supposed to be owner occupied in the primary residence, so basically, with this clause, ADUs can be used.
if it's part of if the main building is the owner's primary residence.
By the
By
way,
definition of ADU.
Owner occupied kind of comes back into play.
Approach, you would have already covered it everywhere. Owner occupied units can be.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say the only note I had from the council's workshop on it was from Rusty, and it said ADU owners must live in the primary residence.
Which people
Yeah.
covered.
Yeah,
So I'm okay with that modification.
Any recollection of why we excluded ADUs in the original draft?
Because of the intent behind the ordinance initially, which was to provide long-term housing options for our workforce. It's something that in theory was supposed to have been an affordable long-term option and increased supply.
One could look at it, and this is getting like the policy, one could look at it the same way we looked at apartment buildings. We didn't want to this is an ADU is a limited sort of, it's a 2-unit house now. The same reason apartments aren't, that's there, but I wouldn't fall on my sword over this issue.
I mean, I'm okay with it. I think it makes some sense.
Okay, you will see.
I mean, the cap is gonna be the thing anyway, so.
Okay, and there is a similar change further into the ordinance in the area related to Title 18. I'll call that out when we get there. But that was for consistency's sake in terms of where ADUs or where short-term rentals are not permitted. The next item here in terms of a
Before we
change,
move on to the next item, and this is related to that, and I heard we talk about that again, and I'm trying to find it in this ordinance. We talk about owner occupied, and I don't see that provision showing up in the ordinance at all. Am I missing it?
I think-
Primary residence is defined in the definitions in
Yeah, that's the
5.2.
definition, but I don't see any provision.
Yeah.
Oh,
let
no,
me-
it
let
was,
me-
I'm sorry, you go ahead.
Let me finish going through everything and let me circle back to that one, Larry, okay? Because I think I may be able to answer it along the way. If not, I'm sure we'll dive back into it. So the next item here was what used to be item L was deleted, and that was that no short-term rental unit within the suburban residential district should be located within 500 feet And this is where we had the distance separation requirements, one of the locations. There was conversation at the work session around that. There was that was like the least consensus-y part of their conversation from what I could recall. And it sounded like where they landed was that so long as there was the legacy provisions for those who currently had STR licenses, that they didn't feel that the separation requirement was necessary, because if you've got legacy provisions and caps in place, in theory, you're not getting that many more coming through the door that can even get a license. Because if you're already maxed out at 70 STR licenses in the urban residential zone, somebody needs to drop off that list before somebody else can get a license. So
That was taken into consideration when we developed this part of the code.
Yeah.
That you might have 3 in a row, 4 in a row. But over the years, they would
Yeah.
be dispersed across the city.
But you wouldn't create new clusters.
Yeah.
in
So the other-
the area with a particularly nice view.
the other piece of this was that when you talk about or look at communities across the state and the country, they're regulating STRs. There's been that longstanding caps versus separation requirements. Separation requirements are falling out of favor, and that caps are really what are kind of dictating how that works. Nina is online who can add more information on that, but that was really why we ended up with this particular recommendation from council.
This seemed to open up a little bit more of a management issue. We'd have to do more measuring, define a lot of stuff. I was not in favor of keeping it in there necessarily. I thought it was going to be onerous to maintain and manage. It adds a layer of, management where you physically got to go out and do some measuring or use a plot from a subdivision or something as the guide and say it's from here to here. I don't know. And so I'm okay with it being deleted. I think the other caps and the other things and the owner occupied and all these other things give us a much better management of it than trying to add this personally.
I'd like to speak because I was the key advocate for the separation provisions. And I advocated that very strongly. And listening, I went to the work session with the city council too, as with George and Don. And I heard the city council say that, if we have a good legacy provision, we don't need the separation requirements. And I had already come to that somewhat of a conclusion before I even went to the work session, that we can live without those. If we have a legacy. Well, we have to have the legacy to balance that.
So how does the legacy negate the requirement for separation?
It doesn't at all. It just simply says, we know our community is only going to have a saturation of so many STRs.
Arguably,
Until one becomes available and goes next door to the other 3 that are on the block. Potentially.
Potentially, you're right.
if you had the right distance provision, and I'm not sure what the measurement is exactly, in some ways is more important than the cap overall, because if you have some, if there's none, if nobody has more than one anywhere near them, it's not necessarily such a problem.
One of the things they brought up at the council was the fact that you get down into downtown section, let's say off of Lake, those earlier developments, those lots are smaller. So 500 yards, you may have,
Actually, yeah, we had it a short of 200 feet.
yeah,
It's, the map shows our urban, our UR district is littered with these things. They're all over the place, right?
And are those all the ones that are licensed and regulated?
I believe, well, this is the map that the city.
Of the
prepared
licensed one.
as of whenever, I think it was late 2022 when they did the map, but. As a practical matter, I don't think this one is going to sustain any interest, so that's some other one based on limiting numbers is probably the way to go. Whether it necessarily is the best in principle or not, it's gonna be Yeah, I personally say I like some provision like this, but I think removing it's probably a smarter way to go. Just
Larry, wasn't that kind of the consensus of council too, was that the distance wasn't really all that big of a thing to them?
With the caveat,
Right.
the legacy.
I'm getting there.
Replace it.
Okay, so the next one, and then the new draft, item L, that was a renumbering, that was M as in Mary in the previous version, that's unchanged, it's just a renumbering. And then that relates to providing adequate off-street parking. And then the N as in Nancy was the really dove into I think the primary residence owner occupied provision that I believe this was added by city council. And they had decided that they wanted to delete it. I believe the rationale was if you're renting an STR, it doesn't matter if you're there or not, you should have a license to do it. And you should be collecting lodging tax consistent with the other part of the ordinance. So yeah, N was a person renting or utilizing only a portion of their dwelling unit, which is their primary residence. For periods of less than 30 days, where the person owns and occupies the dwelling unit during the same periods as the rental utilization. They're not subject to the provisions of the chapter. So like I said, they wanted to take that out. And the bottom line is, if you're home and you're renting out as an STR, you still need to just follow all the rules. So there was no separate exclusions, no other modification around that.
And the important thing you just said, Karen, is this is a provision that the council added. This was not a plan commission. They now want to take it out. I have no problem with that.
I believe
No,
that's.
we
what it
put
was.
it in.
this was
This is Lee's
Sorry,
owner occupied provision. that
my
they're
mistake,
excluding.
I
well,
apologize.
there have been some suggestions too. In fact, at least one council member had sort of talked, he was supportive of this kind of approach. Given the discussion I had 10 minutes ago on this, I would tend to suggest that the person who is the owner occupier, whether or not they have their present while the guest is renting out, is not subject to the cap. So if there is one, that's different than saying it's not subject to
Yeah.
regulation.
Okay,
yeah.
so, and I'm sorry, I
But
really.
I'm
need to
not sure this is the right place to put that.
Well, no, and I really got to interject on that one. Enforcement would be
Yeah.
onerous,
Yeah.
if not impossible, on that particular approach.
To say owner occupiers would not be subject to the cap.
So they have to give licenses
Have
to
to get a li-
people
Yeah, have to get a
as
license.
an owner occupied. It's different count than the licenses for non-owner occupied. So it changes the mix of, that, but
So then you
again, the
get the
owner
call.
occupied is considered probably a short term, not a full-time business necessarily.
You're suggesting that it is it is, if not infeasible, it's very difficult
So,
to categorize. Somebody comes in their application, says, I own, this is my house, or it's not my house.
no, that's the easy
that I
part.
live in.
That's the easy part.
That's,
In practicality, when somebody rents their house out for, I don't know, 2 weeks, or they rent out part of their property for 2 weeks because they're owner occupied, they're around, they're not, or they choose not to be there for part of that time, and the complaint comes in that the tenant was noisy, all that.
they're subject to all the same rules any.
But it just, I just see it as problematic to enforce, but if that's where you guys want to go,
No, saying,
well,
what I didn't understand, what I'm suggesting is there's no difference in enforcement between owner occupied and a corporate owner.
Just determining whether it's occupied by the owner or not.
Affects whether or not it's subject to whatever caps may be in place.
Well, the way we do that, we said was whether they show that that is their primary residence, that's on their driver's license, their voter registration, whatever. That's where they live full time. Whether they're there or not is immaterial. As long as they meet the other requirements, which is there's somebody who can be called if there's an issue. They're to respond 24/7, they meet all the good
It's
neighbor
the
policies.
enforcement- All the enforcement is the same, let's say.
So this is what they're taking exception to, I think, is that we were excluding them from the enforcement and excluding them
Exactly.
from a license and excluding them from paying tax the way this was
Fair
working.
enough.
And I'm okay with including them for licensing,
So-
including them for
All the same.
enforcement, including them for keeping track of it, whatever. But capping them from being able to do this if they rent it out 2 weeks out of the year, because I want to make a little money while I'm going on vacation with trading with somebody or whatever. That's fine.
Different question, right? We
Yeah.
have to discuss it, but it's a different question.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't mind deleting that here as long as you understand. I'm not saying I agree with the.
As it is, it was more freedom for owner occupied than what I was thinking we intended when we first discussed this, that we still thought people should have a license. Or maybe some of us did.
Yeah.
I did anyway. And this was like, well, okay, if they're okay and everybody agrees, I'll go along with it. But I think owner occupied doesn't fall under the same cap and should be licensed and under the same provisions for good neighbor policies and violations, et cetera.
Yep.
You there?
With you.
Okay,
So taking this out the way it was worded, we agree, but we think owner occupied should still have some relief from the cap provisions. That's all. It's not, if you want an STR license and you're owner occupied, it doesn't fall under, it's like the other ones, it's unrestricted in terms of the number.
We
Is the
do have
people live
another-
there.
We do have another owner occupier provision that's built into this. If you look back at the same say, H, you just passed by. Owner occupiers got, way it was structured before, when you hit the cap, the waiting list is formed. Owner occupiers always went to the top of the waiting list.
Yeah,
So there's already a rule for them to get, which
preference.
depending on how strict the cap was.
yeah, if there's no cap on that, then that goes away. We revise that, but
Exactly.
so,
But do we want to put provisions around that part of it then? Because at some point it's a slippery slope. So like the people directly behind me. They refitted the basement, they lived in the basement, they're gonna top out to college kids. Great. At some point they've moved. And it fluctuates. So we've seen a lot of STRs throughout the years. Then they told all the neighborhood, no, we're gonna go back to renting to college kids. They did for this semester this year, they're gone, now we're right back to STRs, and I think they're doing that as a way of floating underneath the radar. To kind of come back and forth and do what they need to do, they're not even in there anymore. We're just gonna be careful that if we're giving them that free rein,
yeah, all of our ordinance is related to licensing. And there's a violation if you're operating without a license,
right?
but who's enforcing that?
I was-
And how is that enforced? That's a whole nother deal. Maybe the problem STRs aren't licensed STRs in Woodland Park.
Well, it is all done less. If I understood a comment made by one council member at the meeting last Friday. The suggestion was that in fact, a lot of this should be part of Title 18 and not necessarily part of the licensing one. I don't think it necessarily matters, and it involved a lot more restructuring to move most of the count, how many there are, it's like into the zoning section as opposed to the business license section. But the point was made. It's a fair point. It's actually would have been a sensible way to construct it.
I'm okay with moving to the next one if everybody's finished commenting.
So we agreed to delete it.
Well, that's
Yeah.
what you got in front of you.
That we don't want to completely exclude owner occupied from any licensing requirements or following the rules of STRs. That is what they're doing by deleting this, is they're making them comply with the rules. But our provision is that we may think that there's a different rule regarding caps. for
And we'll
owner
circle
occupied.
back to caps.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's go.
So page 5, subsection C, items 4 and 5. That is where we had limitations with regard to numbers of violations, whether it was related to zoning or a nuisance regulations or the licensing provisions and good neighbor guidelines that were being developed. The ordinance that came out of Planning Commission talked about no more than one violation in either one of those. And council has asked that this be revised to 2 violations. So that's that change there.
I don't have an issue with that.
Question was, did the revised draft pick up? Because there was some discussion too, and I think it maybe is less than a full consensus, but seemed to be some agreeing on it, that this should apply for a period of 2 years.
I'm getting there.
Is that in there?
Hang on.
Okay.
So that would be turning the page to page 6. And that is subsection E, violation of any provision of this chapter. And it actually reads differently now, that the revision is 2 cited violations within the last 12 months of any provisions of this chapter. So that's where it gets in there, and it's at the end of that sentence or end of that paragraph says, if a short-term rental business license is revoked pursuant to this subsection, such revocation shall be in effect for a minimum of 2 years.
But who's monitoring that again?
That actually would need to go through a due process in terms of confirmation of the violations and stuff. So when somebody's coming in for a license renewal, that would be part of the check that would be done.
Not a whole lot of people are going to get through this because it's so painful for the city and everybody else. This isn't going to happen very often.
Keep in mind that we are dealing with Title V here, and that is the city clerk's responsibility and not the planning department's responsibility.
So. Okay, so that's all of it for Title V. So next we would switch into 18, which is the zoning chapter. And we would want to be on page 7. And it's towards the lower third of that page, B sub 2. And this is to be consistent with Title V, where ADUs that are part of a primary residence where they're owner occupied, that those guys can be used as an STR. So that's there for consistency. And then page 8. It was essentially part of the same section of items, which were standards for short-term rentals. There was a provision 8, and that was where the caps were just, or the distance separations were discussed again, and that was deleted out of here. And then section 7 is where you see all the legacy revisions, or that was cleaned up and revised, but that's where all your legacy provisions are, is section 7 here on page 8. And then section 8, this is the last one to note, that previously was set up to relate to the transition time period, since we were honing on the end of the year and when fees were paid, that kind of thing. So that section previously dealt with 2022 application fees. That has since basically been deleted, and it's rewritten so that this is what addresses biennial review of the caps. So that was the other request, that every 2 years you go back and just revisit what is that cap level and what does that look like with these zone districts relative to the licenses. So that's all of the proposed changes from what you guys had originally sent to City Council in September of 2022.
Everybody in love with having a mandatory review every 2 years of the number of caps. Seems kind of.
Well, and that's potentially just a Title V issue, since that's where the caps live. So that would be not you guys.
Yeah, it's actually unfortunate, whatever we come up with in that is not in the zoning portion, but.
It's because it deals with the quantity of licenses. So.
Karen, how do you envision your coordination with the city clerk's office? Will the city clerk be notifying you that I've got an application for STR? And then you would check the zoning provisions and tell her it's okay, it's not okay?
We had started working on that in terms of an application form and such. And I not 100% remembering, Larry, whether it was like liquor licenses or a dual application between the local government and the state. So this, I wasn't clear, and I don't know if we completely worked it out, if it was a dual application through for the license as well as the planning, or if we, how well we were intertwining those to coordinate between the two departments. I just don't remember the mechanics,
Well, I'm saying it because I think it's a very.
but we
important-
were discussing
Okay,
that.
it's a very important provision because we got in this mess originally without that coordination happening. It's pretty clear.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that when somebody walks in the door and say, I want to do an SDR, you know about it.
Mhm.
And you have a say.
So,
And I like the provision about a 2-year review. That was discussed by the city council too. That gives us an opportunity to say, you know, with all good intentions, we did these things because we thought they were the right thing to do at the time. But now after seeing how this progressed and how it's changed, we need to take another look at it.
It's as if the city council wishes to do it. Fine,
No problem.
exactly. Yep.
I
It
mean-
seems to me like there'd be an administrative suggestion to the council to change them anyhow, since it is a section 5 issue.
Well, and then at some point, would you need to check and balances though? Because you don't want to just say, well, it's the office policy, and they can do whatever they want, and then they can lower it or raise it as they please. Without another body saying, hey, we don't necessarily agree here, and then you're not having someone petition constantly.
the caps, they said they're part of Title V. They are actually part of city code. So if they wanted to change the number, that actually does go through a public hearing process. It just doesn't go back in front of planning commission since it's not Title 18. But it is subject to public comment and scrutiny.
I just wanted to make sure there was some sort of check and balance, that it wasn't just.
So yeah, I would just make sure it clear that that's not an as written, that's not an administrative revision.
If we can come back to it, the approach I would like to suggest people at least to consider. This is G, established cap, and H on the draft we did.
What
The red
page
line.
are you on?
Pardon?
What page are you on, please?
Page 3 of the original. Page 3 of the original
Yeah.
or of the red line, either one. Is the second half of G talks about. We're going to keep an inventory of the number of units, and planning department should keep track of that. And as the number of plats changes, or do we use vacant land or houses, different things? I would suggest instead that rather than being a percentage, there be a number. I suggest that number be equal. The starting point for that number should be the number we have today minus what we think is the owner occupied premises. And then we don't have to do the annual list. We no longer have to sort of say what priority do the owner occupiers get or not get compared to a commercial guy who's coming in to try and do something. It avoids what I think is offensive is not so much a cap, but putting a cap on whether or not you can rent a room in your house. That if it's principally if it's your primary residence, it seems to me that it's not my principally a logic business that's run there. It's your residence.
To help with this part of the conversation, I think I would find it helpful if we could be really clear about what does owner occupied mean?
Well, we have a definition.
What it means.
We have definition of primary residence.
We have definition of primary residence, and we currently have the term in here.
So you're saying they must live in.
If you take a look in paragraph H, it currently has the line, in each such waiting list, the application for short-term rental units, which are located at an owner's primary residence shall begin priority over short-term rental units, which are not the owner and applicant's primary residence.
Right,
So we have wording, at least we thought it was good. I don't mind working on the wording, but.
Well, no, but I need to know what an owner occupied unit is. Does that,
It's just the owner's primary residence is the,
If the guy comes in and says, I own the property and this is my primary
Primary
residence.
residence.
Primary residence is defined.
But Karen is saying to get out of like the property right behind us where, oh yeah, I stayed for a little bit, rented out the top and then I moved completely out. Do we want to regulate? They need to. stay
if
there
they
for
show that
6 months out of
that's their
the
voter
year.
registration and that's their driver's license at that address, that's their primary address.
Yeah.
That would be owner occupied.
okay, so, well, just to make sure I'm clear. So yes, it's my primary residence. I live there 7-8 months out of the year. The other 4 months, I go off to,
In an
I
RV
don't know
or-
where. And
Snowbird.
you know, I rent out my house to somebody else, so nobody's on site during that time period that it's rented to
They
somebody.
don't have to be
else.
on site. They have to
So-
provide somebody who will respond within 24 hours.
These rules talk
7
about
days,
having-
good NOPA rules.
But I just want to make sure that you guys are okay with that.
It's still your principal residence. What's the principal use of that building? It's your residence. Right?
That
Or
you
whoever
intend
it
on
is.
returning to. I think needs to be some language around it also.
Yeah, well, we can tinker with the primary residence definition. There are definitions which talk about it. It'll be your principal place of
We
return.
talked
as well,
about
and
staying there
then-
more than so many days a year and all that, but that'd be hard to verify.
Our
So-
city attorney came up with this
Yeah,
language.
excuse me, Nina's like chiming in. also.
Yeah, just everything you're saying is already addressed in the primary residence definition, so we should just like keep using the same term. And that's very clearly defined in the ordinance that is in front of you.
Right,
Yeah.
so you're saying, Nina, you're saying use primary, stop saying owner.
Yes, please, yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're saying the same thing. It sounds like it's
Primary residence of the owner.
yeah, it's defined and it's defined. I defined it
defined.
in the beginning of the ordinance. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess part of the reason I'm bringing that up and kind of drilling into it was because that other provision that was deleted really was trying to address, I'm living in my house, I'm renting, you know, rooms out on an STR basis, but then I shouldn't have been having to get a business or an STR license around that. So yeah, that piece is going away, but like I said, I just wanted to make sure we were clear on terminology, that we are at primary residence.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's all. Just,
But does the term owner occupied, is it in this?
No, it's
Okay.
the primary residence is in, and then
It doesn't
that
reference.
the STR unit is your primary residence
Right.
is the way I think it's
Correct.
referred to.
And again, let's go back to Lee's great suggestion about getting rid of your percentages. And make it simple and just put a raw number there. And base that on this table with the additional information and trying to figure out how many of these are primary residents.
the finance department, because this is requested by council, they had sent out a questionnaire to all the operators, and I think he's gotten it all back, but it's not been released to me. I don't have that tonight. Well, I will ask if I can get it so that you have it available at a whether your next work session on the 22nd and or by the public hearing on the 29th. But I can ask. I don't have it.
Because I agree, I don't think we should be regulating someone's, primary residence and that they're living there and what they do with their life and how they do it. I just want to be careful that we're not opening ourselves up to more STRs because we've taken this.
Well,
Yeah.
it could be open to more STR, but if that's what it is, that's not coming from me deciding how many you should have. Those are STRs reflect people exercising in sort of an incident of their ownership and their principal residence.
Right, but I'm saying if we exclude those people, then I don't want it to look like, well, these people are all separate, so there's still 70 out there to go. And so now we've opened up,
Well, no, as I
No, we
said,
would
the number,
reduce the number.
number 70 minus
Right.
what appears to be, and by the way, my personal preference would be that 70 minus owner occupiers minus a few more. And should be rounding down. I mean, it would take years to get there because people are gonna continue so if,
Okay,
Just
so,
keep it clean at 70.
well, no, not, it has to be lower than 70, otherwise you are increasing the number. It's 70 minus,
Yeah.
70 minus
Right.
approximation of the number of owner occupiers, and ideally, in my mind, less, even a few less than work down, but that gets really soft trying to decide how much less.
And that's a good comment. You said approximately. So Sharon, Karen,
my
I think
question,
that's important. You don't have to be exact. You can say, based on the base information that we have, we think we have so many SDRs that are the primary residents.
okay, I gotta drill into this slightly differently. So, and I'm gonna keep the math simple. So let's just 70 to start with. That's how many there are. And let's say 10 of those are primary residents. So there's 60 that are not primary residences. So going forward, all those people that have licenses now can continue to have them. But, okay, I'm number 71. It's my primary residence. I want an STR license. I get one?
You get one.
Absolutely.
You get one.
Okay.
Now,
But if you're
not
owner occupied,
the number, let's assume that there's the 10 principal residences are the rental
Primary
units,
residence.
right? You start at 70, so you could definitely subtract 10. You could subtract another 10 or 20,
Yeah,
and as long as we're granting is a legacy guy can still keep using it without regard, the legacy guy isn't capped.
But
As
you're-
legacy people disappear, getting down to the number you have, then you can add new ones. But you can subtract 70 minus 10, you can subtract more without impairing the rights of somebody who is a legacy guy. The legacy guy remains
Okay.
with the right to use.
I get that part, but you're essentially assuming all 60 of my non-primary residence people continue to renew that license for the next 10 years. They stay on top of it. They're there every year. They've got that. Meanwhile, your primary residence people keep coming in. And so that number goes up, say 10 a year. So 10 years later, instead of being at 60 plus 10, you're at 60 plus 100.
Which is
So
the
you
reason, which is the reason
increased,
why 70 minus 10 to 60 probably isn't the place to start.
but still
Probably
you
should be 50 or 40 or
increased
30.
the total number of STRs. And Nina's been like twitching in the background, so I should really let her talk too.
But it's
Like I do over here occasionally, so yeah.
Do you then force someone who has a license to drop off because you've now added the legacy?
No,
In order to keep some
no,
sort of.
the legacy.
no, the legacy, as long as they own the property, they can renew their license as long as they keep good standing
No,
and
I
don't violate.
understand that. I'm just saying.
But if they sell a
71
property,
is-
Somebody else can't get a license until the cap is
Right, I'm just saying, yeah, that's what I'm. well,
decreased. The
essentially-
total is decreased below the cap.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So if there were 10 owner occupiers, you wouldn't use 60, you'd use a number like 50, something. And over a few years, there'll be enough churn that the number of the legacy people would work its way down, and then more people could come in.
But you have the potential for your total number of STRs to go up under that scenario.
correct.
But it can only happen if it's, guys, people who in the principal residence wanted to rent out the rooms, and that's,
Okay,
and I'm not trying to restrict those people.
okay.
Well, to be careful though, because then I could buy the property, I can co-buy it, let's just say I co-buy it with him, right? And we're in here and I'm like, hey, guess what? I'm gonna let you have it and let you own or occupy it. You figure out what you wanna do. I mean, you can potentially open it up to a slippery slope then, because then at that point, I can be some conglomerate and I just rented it with this guy and now we can kind of just.
No,
If you have to be, it has to be your principal residence.
Right, but I-
That's hard to jerk around with your.
Can live there and I leave.
I don't think you can get your driver's license and all your things that primary residence requires if you're not living there.
Right, but it's to say everybody has to live there. Like everyone who bought that house has to live there.
You
She's
might,
buying-
than just one person.
She's buying each of her kids a house is what she's doing.
I see what you're saying.
That would be awesome.
If,
Yeah.
if you,
Probably not today.
if you wanted to buy 9, that was the number, just picked them,
Right, right.
of houses to use as short-term rentals. If you give each one to your kid, and the kid lives in it as his principal residence, I don't have a problem with that.
I know, I'm just asking questions.
Is
I'm
that-
trying to play devil's advocate here in case.
Okay, seriously, Nina would like to say
Okay.
something. unless she changed her mind.
No, I was just keeping my video on. But if you guys have any questions, I was just muting myself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought at one point you wanted to say something.
Probably like 10 minutes ago, but it's okay. I probably forgot it.
she doesn't want to share it with us right now.
So,
Oh, no, the one thing I did want to say, the legacy I addressed in section 7 of the ordinance, and I think that's
Yeah, we-
sufficient. Yeah, okay.
Well, from what I heard from city council, not everybody agrees on city council, but I think they were primarily thinking that the owner occupied or primary residence, short-term rentals, as long as they have an STR license and all that, that I don't think they were in disagreement that it would not be capped. That the ones that are capped and the ones that, but they all need to follow the rules of STRs and licensing. That's what I remember, but I'm there. I'm okay with that. That's so.
I like the principles of it too, and it's hard to see if it becomes much more popular for people to rent out portions of their principal residence. Well, that's not necessarily bad. That's part of
No,
it.
that's not a problem.
That's,
With the economy, you need to supplement your income somehow and.
yeah, and I hate to have that guy have, you can't rent out your room
Right.
because
Right.
So you have a special clause just for primary residence.
well,
Maybe
there's a special
exclusion,
clause, yeah,
yeah.
it's like, you can do.
It doesn't go
But we'll
to.
put in, we put in a cap that says the 70, you'll put in the number 50, say. And
So-
say, and say that doesn't apply to people renting STRs in your principal residence.
I like that idea.
And it doesn't preclude someone who is existing legacy from continuing that use, that.
Yeah, so
authorized use as long
The
as it
scenario
stays in the
that I
state
talked
use.
about when we talked about this was, I gave the example of my mother-in-law, when her husband, my father-in-law passed away, she could no longer afford to stay in her home. They owned it outright, but she had too high electric bills, too high utility bills. And her social security got cut in half, so she decided to rent out the basement. But she didn't have this short-term rental deal, so she had a tenant move in and had to manage all that. It was very hard for her. The short-term rental thing would have been perfect, because if somebody wanted to stay in that room, she'd make a little extra money and they'd be gone. They'd never move in stuff, they wouldn't move in furniture, they just come, stay, leave. And that would probably be some income situations for a lot of people who find themselves in financial difficulty. So the owner occupied, being able to offset their economic turmoil, to me, is valuable to people who have a property and they need the money. They can do that without,
And your
this cap.
mother is still the neighbor next door who knows. who knows
it's still the same
neighbors.
person living in the neighborhood, and so they'll have to manage it, but I just find that this economic times we're in and the difficulties people have and how it is pretty expensive to live in Colorado. People would like to live here and they need to find ways and means to economically do that. So I don't think we should restrict the people who primarily own a residence from being able to make money to make ends meet. That's my take on that.
So I say, but the numbers for those that aren't principal residences does need to be dropped down enough for some amount equal or greater than the current principal residence people. I would say significantly greater, because I think our city has indicated that there's a feeling there's too many.
Is there definition around what short term would be?
Less than 30 days.
So I still haven't seen the demographics that say the people who are saying we need to get rid of short-term rentals, that the short-term rentals weren't here first. Before those people who are saying, I don't want them. I know some of them are new, some of them are recent, because licenses have gone up, but I don't know what that number is of how many people were here before, you know, Zulawaga said buyer beware. If we change the rule and you have to get out of your STR, well, what about the buyer beware? You moved into a neighborhood that had STRs there for 90 years. And now you're trying to get rid of them.
Well, and I'm not trying to get rid of them too. It's.
So I'm just saying there's a number.
We're limiting the number overall, but trying to do it in a way that doesn't.
Exactly.
But
doesn't
we've
hit
limited-
somebody who's currently there.
We've stopped this, what they consider the infiltration of investors buying up the houses to make STRs out of everything in this town.
Well, we stop right now because of
Because
the
of the cap.
moratorium, because the
Well,
moratorium.
the moratorium too, but
That's.
yeah. So anyway. That's just thoughts.
Oh, Karen, we could probably discuss this for another few hours tonight. But what is you mentioned something, another work session on this?
Well, no, only if necessary, because ideally, if there are specific provisions here that you want worded differently, speak up, we'll make that change. That's what we'll put out there in terms of what's going to be considered by this commission on June 29th. Otherwise, I'm assuming what we brought to you this evening is satisfactory for consideration for public hearing on June 29th, but I don't know that that's really the case. But I'd like to get this resolved or moving, and the community definitely deserves to be able to look at what's going to be heard by this commission. An opportunity to review that. So,
This is somewhat new spin on it, so to speak, on what it is, right? I think it presents the opportunity to control the numbers overall, be fair to the people that are currently there, and be fair to people who might need some money renting out a portion of their house.
So Lee, I would suggest a question to you, since you brought up the idea of lowering the number. The city council has presented a number to us, which is equal to the number that currently exists. We've all talked about the provision for owner occupied or primary residence. I think we're all in consensus that that's okay to have that be licensed, but not capped. And I think that should be stated in there, that that's part of it. And then they're going to review, according to their own ordinance, if they go with this and we agree to it, to review caps and look at the number. It can go down, it can go up. That's up to them. But could you live with capping it at what it currently is, which is what they've suggested to us, so that this could go out for the hearing, the comment and the review?
Well, the one part, we don't know what the exact number is. So I would say as a starting point, using the number that exists minus a reasonable estimate of the owner occupied number. That's the way to get current number. So.
Yeah, they actually put 4%, 8% and 1%,
That's because that's what we had. before.
which is slightly rounded up from the existing number. It's not the existing number, it's whatever it rounds up
Yeah,
to.
but
It
here-
adds like one or
we
two, or
wouldn't have to round up. We take the exact.
take the exact number. So maybe we put that up.
Minus an estimate of the owner of the principal residence.
The owner occupied, I agree, should be taken out of the number, and we should set the cap at the number minus the owner occupied. That would be fine. That would be maybe what we could recommend, that we,
So you're saying Karen's example, there's 70, there's 10 primary residences. So you're proposing a 60.
60.
number, while Lee's proposing.
Propose 10
a
less.
lesser number.
and I'm just saying, in order to get maybe us to move forward,
In order to get a draft, if we put the.
it would match
example, putting
what the
60
city council said
putting
more
the 60
closely
in a
than
draft.
reducing it.
I would absolutely agree to put the 60 in a draft, and I come back and argue the case for you guys, but let's make it fit.
My only issue with that is
Whatever
the timeframe that they have. If we send something back to them that they got a whole new issue to discuss as city council, when they've already proposed to us a number or very close to a number, if we go back with their number minus the owner occupied, it's less discussion for them. It doesn't open up this conversation that we spent time talking about at the
Correct.
city council meeting, perhaps.
they
I'm
won't-
just suggesting that that might be the place to start. They're going to review the number. They're going to look at the number in the future. We could propose the exact number, though. I don't have an issue with that, but if we change it, that opens up another,
Now, one of the reasons for the exact number is we can simplify this provision too, and I mean, the part I hate about.
Right, how
Waiting
you
around
calculate
for a new plat to be approved somewhere so that so that you can round up another.
I agree with you there. That is onerous to deal with.
Well, that, and I think part of the problem becomes we've already given so many licenses, and if we start moving our cap down, what do we do with the people who are over?
No,
Their legacy until they sell the house.
Legacy.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so, but I'm just saying there has to be some provision around that.
There is,
Yeah.
there is in
This is where
Nina's,
that protection is
Yeah.
gonna come
in Nina's proposal, there's a legacy.
Section 7.
in. Right, but I'm just saying, I don't want council to then open up a new can of worms and now it's gotta come back again, or they've got to discuss it again. or
Yes.
think about it.
Nina, do you follow what we're talking about? Does this present drafting challenges for you? I mean, I could take a stab at it, but I bet you'd rather take a stab at it. than let me do it.
You want a number instead of a cap, and then you want to take away the primary residence. I think it sounds like what would be better is if you actually knew the amount of primary residences, subtract that from.
Yeah, well, you don't.
Supposedly that
you don't
data's
need to
been
know that for
collected.
Drafting purposes, there is a number, you know, it's for SR, there will be a number, call it 55, call it 60, whatever, we'll get some input on that. But that's not a drafting question. The exact number.
No, because you would just leave it blank and put the number, as long as it's a number, not, we know the meaning behind it, but that shouldn't be in the ordinance, it should just be the number, so we could always leave it blank. Or-
Right. I mean, you can sort of see it, shall not exceed the established cap, delete or applicable percentage. And the established cap shall be so and so, and then, and delete the stuff about the inventory. And we add a new paragraph, maybe in place of what we took out before, another new paragraph someplace saying that the cap does not apply to those people in their principal residence.
Right.
And make clear that the legacy provision, you know, would allow people above the cap to continue their,
Which it
to
is.
continue their,
Right.
their usage.
Yeah, that legacy provision, I think is pretty clear already.
Yeah,
on
so,
that,
but I just want to make sure I'm clear, because I know you wanted a lower number, but what Ken is proposing is a formula that says how you got there.
No, I don't think so. No, there is a number in SR zone.
Yeah.
Which is what's currently 70.
Right. That's the.
Instead, we're
that's
gonna
what-
write a number, whether it's 60 or 55 or 50 or 40. We're gonna take our best, the starting point is the best estimate of the principal
Primary.
residence people.
Well, estimate's one thing. I think the data they've collected
They
is
may
what
have a
should,
number.
what should
Based on
fuel that
that,
number.
that's-
And that's when we're having a discussion again, whether in a work session or public hearing, I may well argue that, okay, the number that came out to be 58,
Whatever. yeah.
whatever that number was. I may argue that that's too many, and it should be 50 or 40.
But
or
see,
30.
that's the part where that's
But
subjective, right?
It is.
You don't know how
It-
did you get there?
I don't know how I could get there. It just feels like we have too many. I think our citizens have told us we have too many,
Right.
but ultimately the city council is going to decide what's too many, right?
Take the total number minus the owner occupied minus 10%.
Whatever everyone
Just
comes
take-
up with,
yeah.
but it's for drafting purposes. It's simply a number, and the number we'll put in will be whatever Karen can provide us as guidance to say how many principal residences there are.
And I need to play devil's advocate because you may hear this at a later point. I appreciate, it sounds like your goal is to reduce the number of short-term rentals.
I think that's what Lee's proposing.
That's I'm not sure everyone agrees with that. but that's-
However, I do want to again note that you may be reducing the number of commercial operations.
Yeah.
But at the same time, because there's no limitations on owner or a primary residence, short-term rental, that has the potential to go up.
Right.
So.
But that's always been in the provision
You-
of the ordinance before.
You may end up with considerably more short-term rentals. It's just who owns them is the only distinction.
But if it's my house, I'm renting a room out and where I live, there's a principal residence, I don't think I have the same negative impact in the neighborhood, and I think I ought to be able to do that.
There's a difference between renting a room out versus renting the whole house out.
I understand, but you know,
Okay.
we can only parse so fine too, you know, it's still, it makes, if it's my primary, if it's my residence, that's the predominant use of the property. The property isn't primarily a short-term rent. It's not a little mini hotel, not a boarding house. It's my house. And I live there. So I'm willing to accept that because This is, call it being part of a free country. What does it mean to have a house?
Okay,
And
so,
excuse me,
no, go ahead, Larry, please.
I'm just gonna say, that's why it's so important to have a vision that this whole thing be reviewed on a regular basis. Just what you said, what if
Yeah,
this would spike and it was an unintended consequence of our actions? We have an ability to say, yeah, that was a problem. We didn't think about this or whatever. We have the ability to come back every 2 years or to re-review it.
yeah, and that every 2-year review is in there.
Yep.
Forget which section, but it's there.
Well, I think that's the safeguard.
Yeah.
from what you're talking about.
Keeps us from being behind the curve again.
Exactly. I think we're being barely forward. We're using a lot of brain energy to think about the what ifs here, and we're analyzing stuff. It may not agree with everybody, but at the same token, we're doing our best. We know there's an impact, and we know there's people that have enjoyed it. They ought to continue to enjoy it, and we ought to have a provision to allow some to continue or be added.
Okay, so I'm stepping on the chair's toes here a little bit, but it sounds like the bulk of the changes are acceptable. It's just this particular provision here that relates to caps that is the one where there is question. Yes?
Yes.
I think I'm okay with, let me just add a comment to it. I think most of us are okay with the cap being in there and the city council's recommendation. But Lee brought up this provision that's different. And I haven't heard anybody else say that they're not okay with starting with the city council number, that they want that reduced number other than Lee so far.
Well, and I guess where I was gonna go next, Ken, was, so we've narrowed it down to this paragraph as needing some work, this provision G and caps. And so I was asking, I'm looking for, what is the consensus of what you would like to have in the ordinance that comes to you for public hearing?
Okay,
So, and
I would like to state
agree
one.
that Lee's got a definite opinion that we've done a lot of discussing on, but yeah, what is the consensus for purposes of?
So I would like to state one. I would put forward for consensus voting or whatever, that we go with a numeric cap of the number of existing that are not primary residence STRs as the limit in suburban residential and urban residential zones
What about PUDs?
and PUD. So that we meet the number that the city council proposed, except that now we're capping it at a lower number because the primary residence STRs are not included in the cap. And then the paragraph that we add back in about the primary residence STRs is that they follow all the rules of STRs, except they're not subjected to the caps in suburban residential, urban residential, and PUD. So that would be what I would be able to have consensus on. I think if Lee wants to have a comment or recommendation that they might consider a lower cap as a way to drive the number lower in the future on the cap number, I'm okay with that, but I don't want to put that forward in the ordinance that we send for the public comment, because it changes fundamentally that area that city council said, what about this? Are you okay with it? I would rather go with the number that is. So that would be, I would put that as one item. Could we get consensus around? And then I would recommend that Lee's item, which is the similar thing, except create a number that's lower than the current existing number, so that we are putting out there that once legacies move off, we will reduce STRs over that period of time. And that's still getting reviewed every 2 years. I would propose that that would be the other one that we consider. And I'm leaning towards the first one, not these.
And well, it sounds like you may be closer to getting a draft that people are happy to discuss from is using, the cap is a fixed number equal to the, what we believe is the non-principal residence items. We'll have a discussion. We'll see what the public hearing about it with public's involved views, no doubt, over the last year.
Sure.
And maybe that's not hard for us at the meeting to change. not 60, let's make it 50. I mean, that's not hard for us to make a
No.
recommendation. If we chose to, we may choose not to. But that doesn't affect the drafting. So.
That be part of the 2-year recommendation then, that every 2 years we revise?
Well, there is already a 2-year review period, and I don't
No, I'm
think.
saying part of that review. Write it in as part of the review.
Maybe, I'm not sure what you're.
It
adding.
specifically says to review the caps in the
Right.
2-year review, so. What would you add to it?
No, I'm just saying that because we're already reviewing it, that there's really not a point in
Right.
putting it in again, it's already being reviewed.
Yeah.
It could be written, I believe. Nina may argue, that, basically the non-primary residents, STRs, that as, those are not renewed or lost, that they just eventually go away. That you're not allowed to ever replace one, so that over time, the non-owner, the non-resident ones, non-primary residents, they just completely drop off to the point where they're eventually at 0.
Well, no, that's if you had a cap of 0.
Well, there's also ways, there's a way you could write it otherwise to get to that. If you really wanted to eliminate them, there was a way to get there, is what I'm suggesting.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not sure I agree that 0 is the right number.
No, I think there's people who've been here for decades that have non-primary residence properties that will never be a primary residence, that they'll definitely probably want to sue if we take away their right to continue to have their cabin in Woodland Park after decades.
No,
Take-
that would still be there under the legacy clause.
No,
What
you're
I'm saying is eventually, over time, the number of legacies will diminish, and that point it will either.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
It'll immediately drop below the cap, or over time, depending where we set the cap.
All right, so Ken made a suggestion there. I'm trying to build consensus here because it's 9:44. And this is like our last item. So what do you,
I propose, I'm in favor of Ken's suggestion over Lee's.
I'm satisfied. I think we should. I guess we draft it with Ken's suggestion, but.
Let's go.
But the numbers is almost to be left blank, right? Because we have to hear. We want Nina to provide a revised draft, and she'll put a blank in for the numbers. Karen, if you've got good information from Aaron or otherwise,
I'll find out.
we can see. If not, if not, we'll forward it with a formula instead. You know, what our intent is. If people think this idea sounds fine, other people speak up too. I mean, that's.
Yeah, that's 2
We-
of you.
we-
Where's the other 5?
We have an opportunity because we have another regular meeting coming up on 22nd.
Yeah, but I'd really like this more solid since that's only a week
She has to
out
release the stuff.
your hearing. So, but is your suggestion just to give us numbers on it? Yeah, if I can
Yeah,
avoid
I
having.
mean,
it come back
I
to you,
think
that'd
we're
be
only
great.
down to one item. Primarily that we need to flush out. And we could do that at a very short time period, hopefully, on the 22nd in a work session.
Nina,
Great.
would it be out of line to ask to have the numbers before a work session, just so we can solidify what those numbers are, but agree to everything else? The last one,
No, she's there. She's,
trying to unmute.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry, it's a question. I think it's better to keep that blank and have the numbers and see if staff could plug in the numbers than to kind of explain how you got to the numbers in the ordinance, yeah.
I'm not in agreement of eliminating item L, on page 4, which is the separation distances. I would like to see those maintained. Those item L, I think it's repeated further back as well.
So you want to keep distance separations is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
I do not. I think it's onerous to manage.
one part, if there's thinking one way or another, and one could leave it in and still at least, it's easier to subtract something in a meeting than it is to draft something in a meeting. So is there, I mean, I think I've previously said.
I mean, that's what we
like
did
the idea. I'm
before.
Not certain that that's
We
exactly.
were in the same position before and we left it in and they took it out.
Yeah.
At city council. So
I
you
think
want to put it
city
back
council
in
Pretty much hates it, but if.
when they've already,
Is there some other sympathy for retaining it?
I thought I heard the city council say they were okay with the legacy provision. And they wouldn't need the distance.
I don't see how those are.
I don't see how they.
I don't either.
Relate to each other.
And I
Two
relived,
separate issues.
I relived the work session earlier today. I viewed it again, and that really is crazy, is that sound, yeah,
No, you didn't do that.
diametrically opposed that sounds. That really was where they were, that so long as there were good legacy provisions, they were fine with no distance separations.
So let's vote on.
seems like it'd be the other way.
I understand if they want us to, or we can discuss.
No, I'm just saying,
I understand your.
I'm not trying to rubber stamp. I'm just saying I wasn't in agreement with it saying it in the first
I
place,
understand that.
but I was okay sending it forward. They took it out and I'm still not thinking it needs to be there. If we were trying to get opinions from our full new panel of commissioners, I'm one that would propose to go ahead and let it be deleted.
What do our new commissioners think?
Yeah, I was kind of waiting for them too.
Kind of agree with you, Lee. Leave it in there right now, and it's easier to take it out than to put it back in when we hear public comment.
Yeah, so the whole idea behind the distance, right, we're dealing with density was the issue. And what they're saying is, from a legacy perspective, that density doesn't apply yet, right? It's the next one.
Yes.
If so, and we've got a cap. So there's no next one yet, but when that next one does come, then those rules will come into play. That's what,
That's what would
you
happen
know,
if we leave that.
if we leave it in there, yeah. Right. So I don't think that's a bad idea, and I'm a little concerned about the unlimited non-primary residence. Because if you get a summer of people going away and all of a sudden they become STR'd, that doesn't solve a lot of the problem that the community was having, right? So I'm a little concerned about, and I think Karen, you're right, there's a little bit of this unlimitedness that's floating around there that could have a very negative connotation.
I think there's clusters of buildings that are old in the urban residential in particular. That if we want to see, investment in those properties, some of them are more suited to STRs than residences in some cases. There's a lot of vacation properties that people don't live in full time because they're not very accommodating for long-term living. And they're clustered, but they're owned, they're not STRs, but somebody might want to rent one out and apply for an STR, and they definitely in the urban residential zone. I've seen a lot of investment in the urban residential zone that I think is somewhat STR related. I don't know for a fact, but.
Well, there's certainly
And
higher.
that's why I was kind of like, the distance provision is just gonna let properties go in some cases, I think, where they're gonna
The
deteriorate.
distance provision means that I can tell somebody at a public hearing, see them and says, I've got an STR next door to me on the right-hand side. How do I prevent somebody on the left-hand side from getting another STR on it too? And the answer, if there's no distance provision, the answer is, well, you hope that because we're limited, they'll find a better place than your other side of your house. And that's, how reassuring is that to somebody?
Well, I mean, there's other, like I said, there's other limits that have kept that from happening. It doesn't have to,
I don't see that.
well, there's a cap. Nobody can get a license that doesn't live in that house.
Right.
So
When the license becomes available eventually. And who's to say what the density might be?
I see what you're saying, but okay, so it could be that STRs move from one neighborhood to another and become dense.
Yes, yeah.
And that's, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I guess in some cases,
The gap gets smaller and smaller, the likelihood that
Right.
the need for the density gets less because the probabilities are less if you have fewer.
Yeah.
fewer of the STRs, right?
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Like I said, we went through this conversation and we conceded and went with it, so I can do that again.
I think we've got three things we need to give direction to the staff on right now. One is continue this work session until 22nd. Where we have more time to contemplate all these thoughts that we've been having tonight. Think about this a little more. And at that meeting, say, this is what our proposal for our public hearing will be the following week. I mean, I know we're running close, but that's what we need to do. Continue the hearing, continue the work session. Number two, make a consensus decision by a vote of hands on the spacing.
Distance separation.
This is, thank you. Couldn't get the word, that one. And then another one on the provision for the caps. Either, as Ken said, the city council wants us to do this, and Lee suggested this, and have a choice between those two. And give direction to council.
And we can't vote on those tonight?
Yeah, I think we can
Yeah,
do that.
formally vote.
No, I'm not formally. I'm just saying to see if we have consensus or not
Yeah,
before
but just,
setting a whole nother work session and putting it back a week. If those are the two open items.
You know,
I
and
think the work session would just allow us to see what this thing looks like.
Yeah,
Total.
benefit work session, we can take a look at what Nina prepares and see, is that what we meant, sort of to?
Well, we definitely should review. I agree with that. We should review.
Fairly short, we can add it on to an existing one, which is. Was this what we meant to have on the table to bring to the public hearing?
Exactly.
Well, I would like to have us vote on whether we have, or just a show of hands consensus on these two items tonight to see which way she should write the draft. Sure.
okay.
Three
So-
items.
Three items, okay.
Work session.
Sorry, process wise, Nina, I think I need your help on this, but I believe we need to have the ordinance out there in its entirety 2 weeks prior to the public hearing. Because I know we have to give notice 2 weeks in advance.
Yeah, not the whole ordinance, just the title, and the public hearing is happening.
Okay, but I guess I ideally wanted the bulk of everything out there. Well in advance for the community to look at, because otherwise you end up with that feedback of we didn't have adequate time to review this, which. As a staff person, I really would prefer not to have that conversation with members of our community because they deserve every opportunity to be able to look at things. So anything that's in front of you at the work session really on the 22nd really is, hey, this is what we've got for you to actually conduct the hearing on. And if there's hopefully at that point, not real big changes that you're wanting to make, unless it comes through that hearing, that hopefully we have captured the direction here tonight adequately. So the next one is straw poll. Who wants distance separation added back in? I got 7 on that.
That, by the way, that also means like section 7,
All the places.
the legacy for the distance still, it has to go back into.
Yeah.
Right, and so we have to
Yep.
connect everything.
There was,
Well, and I
it
think.
appears in Title 5 and Title 18, right?
I think that's actually already worded in such a way that if you've got your license, you can continue to maintain the license, irregardless of any of the other rules.
As
kind of thing.
long as that's clear as.
So, all right, and I'm gonna do this multiple ways, so just bear with me. So just groove with me. So with regard to council's suggestion that the caps appear as the percentage of, the existing data. Who is comfortable with a percentage appearing?
Interesting.
Okay, that's nobody, Nina. So who would like to see an actual number of units as a cap? That's everybody on that, so I'll work on that data. And then I believe based on that, you also would like to see the actual number of owner occupied.
Primary resident.
Yeah, primary. Thank you. Thank you. That's the next one tonight.
What we want to see is the cap number be the current number of non-primary residents STRs. That's option one, or that number minus some amount. Please suggestion, option two.
Actually, I think I'm just gonna bring you both sets of numbers, that this is the cap for these, and you guys
Yep.
can go from there.
Works for me.
That'll work.
What else should we get a consensus on, or does that cover everything?
Did you get the one that no cap for principal residence? Was that one of your? I think that was implicit, but I'm not sure you asked.
Okay,
you
so,
asked-
yeah, I'll actually, double check
Because
that. So,
does create risks. but-
so no cap for, primary residence. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-ish, okay. 6.
Do we want to, I mean, but all the other provisions of STRs licensing and all that apply.
Yes.
I think if you draft it, it'll come out that way. It
Yeah.
says,
It
it
just
said,
can't.
however, if it's your primary residence, the
Yep.
cap doesn't apply.
Yeah.
Can I just want to make a point on that though. So today, that 70 in the SR, that includes primary residence STRs.
Yes.
That's all of them,
It's
yes.
everything.
Okay, so today, the folks who want to do it can and do within, and we know that they're getting a license. So today they're in. Right?
Yep.
Okay. So unlimiting them, making it unlimited seems problematic to me.
It's no change in what was proposed before in terms of primary residence.
It's.
They're not,
Other than now,
Well-
we've added back in that they need to be licensed and
right,
kept track of.
Okay.
But we've always contended that somebody in their own home living there can rent a room out if they want to. We
But
just want it to be licensed and
you keep
follow the
saying it's a
guidelines.
room, But I think Karen made a good point.
It
It could be, a
snowbirds for the season. or
It could be.
The bottom layer of the house.
could be a whole house.
Yeah, it could be the whole house for the season.
And the problem,
If
The
that's.
problem?
they have to follow all the guidelines. They have to have somebody to call. They have to have 24/7. They have to meet all the good neighbor policies. They can't disturb their neighbors. They can't make noise. They can't have weddings. They can't do all these things that people have said they have problems with STRs. So
If the number is gonna grow, it's the number grows from people using the principal residence. It's not growing from
external investors and outsiders,
lodging houses.
it's people who live here.
Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I hear you.
So who are you gonna tell they can't do that? That when the neighbor down the street is doing it. Now I can't make a little extra money by renting my room out 2 weeks a year.
No, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I'm
And
just-
the issue is if they're gonna go somewhere and rent it to somebody, that's a little different, but that we found out to be very onerous if we leave that on court. How are you gonna regulate that? So, and I don't mean to say it's all on the neighbors, but if there's a policy issue that's a violation that gets reported, they won't have a license to do an STR, whether they're a primary residence or not.
Right.
They'll lose their license. It's just, we're not capping people from being able to, because that's a property rights issue and you're saying they can't do something when they haven't had, on Rusty Neal's term was due process and all these kinds of things. So we kind of went down that road. That's why we wound up where we did, I think, but
So what I hear is a Ken's provision and a Lee's provision. A choice, right?
no, she's just gonna do the number. We already
Yeah.
went
I
past that.
understand Ken's and Lee's are basically the same, it's just what that number
Yeah,
is.
Oh, okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the only difference, is whether we decide to open up let's do a
I just-
reduction plan or
Just-
leave it at just the cap and let. The legacy thing and other provisions like distance and all that, eliminate them.
And to be clear, I'm only bringing you data,
Right.
just what the
Correct.
numbers are.
Here's the
Would-
numbers, put the one in there
If
that,
you guys want to do other policy decisions around reductions, you'll have to speak up, but otherwise staff's just bringing numbers.
Anything else on the work session for this evening?
So just to go, 2 weeks from now, we'll have hopefully a short work session with a draft, having the draft document in hand.
The one that will be,
I have one other comment. You guys working on this STR thing and then watching other groups work on it. I really appreciate you all being willing to listen to ideas, no name calling, no
We'll get that.
lying about what somebody said or all these other things that seem to be going on. It's very refreshing. Thank you for your participation and your willingness to hear ideas and debate. Yes, it's a working way to do it. I like it. Thank you.
So to answer the other question, I was gonna say, the bulk of the ordinance is already out here in front of you, so there's just a couple of small revisions here based on your guidance this evening. And yeah, the meeting on June 22nd, we'll have this particular item with those final revisions. And then also back to our regular code review that we're doing.
you know, and it comes back to what you said about presenting the proposal to the public, what they see. And I think that's what we're trying to safeguard. They're saying that, okay, in 2 weeks, we're going to have a clean draft and this is what we're proposing. And that's, we can hear comments saying we need more time to review it and we can postpone the hearing to another.
No, and it's actually the week before when we get something pulled together, just because when it goes out in the packet to you all and stuff. So I believe that's June 15th. So basically a week from now. So. Okay.
So we move on to reports. Do you have anything, John?
I did. I just gotta find my agenda because that's what I wrote it on. Sorry.
You know, Ken, your little speech here at the very end was very important for us to do that. Because I really think that the planning commission really should be doing the job of what the city council doesn't have time to do. And they couldn't sit here for several hours and do this during the regular meeting where we have the opportunity. And I believe that we've had the opportunity to hear from the public input on this project and know what the concerns are and know what the possible problems what STRs could present to our community. And we have provided provisions in our code or our proposed code to address those issues the best we can. So thank you.
So, reports, I just had one thing. And at the June 1st council meeting, Points Consulting, at the beginning of the meeting did a short overview of what they're looking at as part of the housing needs assessment that they're doing for the city of Woodland Park. And related to that, I believe it's next week when they will be launching a survey out to the community to gather some additional information with regard to public perception and just some data points. So be watching for that. And like I said, if you want to go back and just listen to their, I think it's all of 15 minutes where they go over the scope of what they're doing and working on. So that's continues to work along out there.
Anything else from the commission? No comments? It's 10:05, meeting's adjourned.